Many people look at the Wild West through romantic eyes. They think about heroic cowboys riding into sunsets, honorable gunfights at high noon, and rugged individualists conquering the frontier with nothing but grit and a six-shooter. Nothing could be further from the truth. For most people, the Wild West was a brutal, relentless struggle against starvation, disease, and the environment itself. Let's find out now why your chances of surviving 1 month in the real frontier would be worse than your odds of winning the lottery 5 times in a row. Before the story, if these help you sleep, like or subscribe would be cool. Also, drop where you're listening from and the time. I check the comments, and it's crazy seeing people from like Australia and Norway on the same video. Okay, tonight it's the Wild West. But before we go anywhere, get cozy, like actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. So, congratulations. You just woke up in 1875 somewhere on the American frontier. The first thing you notice isn't the singing birds or the fresh air, it's the dirt in your mouth, in your eyes, on your skin, between your teeth because you're lying on a dirt floor. Your back aches something fierce from sleeping on what might generously be called a mattress, basically a canvas sack stuffed with straw that's now home to who knows how many bugs. There's a damp, earthy smell filling your nostrils, not like that pleasant petrichor after rain, more like wet soil mixed with animal dung. Unlike your cozy bed right now, you've spent the night in what settlers called a soddy, a house made literally of dirt. The walls around you are thick chunks of prairie grass cut into bricks, roots and all, stacked like some filthy Lego project. The roof, also sod, laid across wooden poles, and it's leaking in at least 3 places. You sit up and immediately bang your head on a low ceiling beam. A small shower of dirt rains down onto your face, and something that might be a beetle lands in your hair. Welcome to frontier living, where the outdoors is always finding ways to get indoors. Well, ain't you just the picture of sunshine this morning? Comes a voice from the corner where a woman is already stoking a small fire in a cast iron stove. She looks about 40, which means she's probably 25. Life ages you fast out here. Best get your britches on. Them cows ain't gonna milk themselves, and the chickens need feeding before we can even think about breakfast. You look down and realise you're wearing what amounts to a threadbare flannel nightshirt. Not exactly the fringed leather outfit you imagined. Your Hollywood-inspired dreams of the Wild West are already crumbling faster than the ceiling of this sad dirt house. The floor is cold against your bare feet as you stumble to the window, really just a small square cut in the sod wall with a piece of oiled paper stretched across it. No glass. Actual glass windows were a luxury most settlers couldn't afford. Through the translucent paper, you can make out the faint glow of dawn. It's probably around 4:30 in the morning. The day starts early on the frontier, regardless of how poorly you slept. "Don't just stand there gawking," the woman says, handing you a pair of rough canvas pants and a homespun shirt that feels like it was made from the same material as a potato sack. "Your pa's already out seeing to the horses. We got a full day ahead." "Pa? You have a frontier father now?" This is getting weird, but before you can ask questions, the woman, apparently your mother in this strange new reality, is shoving a pair of boots towards you. They're stiff, cracked leather things that have clearly seen better days. And they're about half a size too small. "And mind the snakes when you head to the outhouse," she adds casually, as if mentioning there might be rain later. "Killed a rattler out there yesterday, but where there's one, there's likely more." Snakes in the outhouse, of course, because using a hole in the ground for a toilet wasn't already unpleasant enough. As you dress, you take stock of the soddy's interior. The entire house is one room, maybe 15 feet square. There's the cast-iron stove, a rough wooden table with 3 mismatched chairs, a small cupboard with a few dishes, and 2 beds, the straw-filled torture device you just rose from, and a slightly larger one where you assume your parents sleep. A few clothes hang from pegs on the wall, and a single shelf holds what appears to be a Bible, an almanac, and a jar containing something unidentifiable. Your mother catches you looking at the jar. "Pickled beets," she says. "Last ones from fall, been saving 'em." Outside, the air is crisp and cool. The soddy sits on a slight rise, giving you a view of the surrounding landscape. It's not the majestic mountains and dramatic canyons of Western movies. Instead, you see a vast, almost featureless prairie stretching to the horizon in every direction. There are a few scraggly trees near what must be a creek about a quarter-mile away, but otherwise it's just grass, sky, and emptiness. Near the soddy is a small barn, also made of sod, a chicken coop constructed of salvaged wood, and the dreaded outhouse, which is basically 4 planks arranged around a hole in the ground with a half door for what passes as privacy. There's a vegetable garden fenced with rough branches to keep animals out, and beyond that, a field where some kind of crop is beginning to grow in neat rows. It's beautiful in a stark, lonely way, and utterly terrifying when you realize how isolated you are from everything familiar. The nearest town could be days away. No hospitals, no grocery stores, no indoor plumbing, no electricity. Just you, your family, and the unforgiving elements. A man emerges from the sod barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He's wearing a broad-brimmed hat that's seen better days, not the fancy Stetson you might have imagined. His face is weathered and tanned, with a beard that seems more a result of not having time to shave than a fashion choice. There's nothing of the dashing cowboy about him. He looks tired, dirty, and much older than he probably is. "Thought you'd sleep the day away," he calls, but there's no real anger in his voice, just resignation and maybe a touch of amusement. Cows are milked. You can start on the chicken feed and water. You nod, not sure what else to do, and head toward the chicken coop. As you walk, your 2 small boots create blisters almost immediately. The chickens regard you with suspicious, beady eyes as you enter their domain. They're scrawny things, nothing like the plump birds you'd see in a grocery store, but they produce eggs, and out here, that's as good as gold. You have no idea what to do, but you notice a bucket of what looks like cornmeal mixed with kitchen scraps near the door. You scatter it around, and the chickens descend on it like tiny, feathered velociraptors. "Not all at once, you dolt," comes your father's voice behind you. "That's got to last 'em the day. Small amounts morning and night. Great. You've been on the frontier for less than an hour and you're already failing at basic survival tasks." "Sorry," you mutter, stepping back as he demonstrates the proper amount to feed the chickens. "And get the eggs while you're in there," he adds, walking away to attend to some other chore. Eggs. Right. You spot a few nests built into the wall of the coop, and sure enough, there are eggs inside. You reach for one and immediately get a vicious peck on your hand from an indignant hen who wasn't done with her laying. Ouch. You pull your hand back, now sporting a small but painful wound. The hen glares at you, offended by your intrusion. "You got to check if she's still sitting first," calls your mother from the doorway of the soddy, shaking her head. "Lord help us, it's like you never collected eggs before, because you haven't, not in this century anyway." Eventually, with guidance shouted from across the yard, you manage to collect 6 eggs without further injury. A miracle, apparently, as your mother seems surprised by the bounty. 6, that's a good morning, she says, taking them from you carefully. "We'll have 2 for breakfast, trade 2 in town next time your pa goes, and save 2 for setting. 6 eggs is considered wealth out here. This puts your modern life into sharp perspective." Breakfast, when it finally happens, is nothing like the hearty frontier meals depicted in films. There's a thin porridge made from cornmeal, cooked until it's a paste-like consistency, a single egg divided among 3 people, and coffee so weak it's basically brown water, but still treated like precious nectar. No sugar, no cream. Those are luxuries saved for special occasions. "We got any bacon?" you ask hopefully, your stomach still growling despite the porridge. Your parents exchange a look that's somewhere between amusement and concern. "Bacon," your father repeats. "In May, we slaughtered the pig in November, smoked what we could. Last of it went in April's stew pot. No bacon until next winter. This is truly a nightmare." After breakfast, your father explains the day's work. There's a field to plough, seeds to plant, wood to chop, water to haul from the creek, and a dozen other tasks that need doing before sundown. The list is overwhelming, especially considering the primitive tools available. No tractors, no power tools, not even proper shovels. Just hand-forged implements that look like museum pieces. "And watch for Indians," he adds casually. "Saw signs of Sioux passing through yesterday, probably just hunting, but keep your eyes open." Right. Add potential conflict with displaced indigenous peoples to your list of concerns. Though history has often distorted these interactions, many encounters were peaceful trades or simply cautious observation from both sides. The tensions created by white settlement on native lands were very real. The work is back-breaking. Within an hour, your hands are blistered, your muscles are screaming, and you're sweating despite the cool morning air. Modern life has not prepared you for this level of physical labor. There are no breaks, no weekends, no vacation days on the frontier, just endless work driven by the simple imperative to survive. Water comes from the creek, carried in heavy wooden buckets that dig into your palms as you walk. It's silty and probably teeming with bacteria, but it's all you have. Your mother boils some for drinking and cooking, but washing is done with unboiled water because fuel is too precious to waste on cleanliness. By midday, you understand why frontier people often look so grim in photographs. Who has the energy to smile when every aspect of survival requires constant grinding labor? Lunch is more cornmeal, this time made into a dense bread and served with a thin soup that has a few unidentifiable vegetables floating in it. Again, you eat everything, suddenly understanding why waste was considered a sin. When each calorie requires hours of work to produce, you don't leave anything on your plate. The afternoon brings new challenges. A wheel on the plough breaks, requiring your father to improvise repairs with materials on hand. A chicken goes missing, likely taken by a fox or hawk. Dark clouds gather on the horizon, promising rain that might be either blessing or curse, depending on how much falls and how quickly. Might be a gully washer coming, your father observes, looking at the sky with concern. Better get the animals in and secure what we can. A severe storm on the open prairie is no joke. With no buildings taller than your soddy for miles around, you're essentially living in a lightning rod, and if the rain is heavy enough, your sod roof could literally melt away, collapsing the whole structure. As you help herd the chickens into their coop and lead the cow into her stall in the sod barn, you realize how precarious existence is out here. There's no calling for help, no emergency services, no infrastructure to fall back on. It's just you, your wits, and whatever resources you've managed to accumulate. The first fat raindrops begin to fall as you dash back to the soddy. Inside, your mother is already placing buckets under the known leaks in the roof. The interior of the house grows dim as the storm clouds block the sun, and she lights a precious candle, another item too valuable to waste, but necessary now. Get the quilt off the bed, she instructs you. Hang it there by the door to keep the draft out. You do as you're told, noticing how the packed earth floor of the soddy is already turning muddy near the doorway where rain is blowing in. The smell of wet earth intensifies, and somewhere in the walls you hear the scurrying of what must be mice or possibly something larger seeking shelter from the storm. The rain hammers down, creating a strange drumming sound on the sod roof. Water begins to drip in new places, and soon there are more leaks than buckets. Your mother seems unperturbed, simply moving the buckets to catch the worst drips and letting the others fall where they may. "Ain't the first time we've been rained on inside our own house," she says with a shrug. "Won't be the last." Your father comes in, soaked to the skin and tracking mud. He removes his dripping hat and coat, hanging them by the stove to dry. "Creek's rising," he reports. "If it keeps up like this, we might have to move to higher ground tonight." The casual way he mentions possibly abandoning your home to floodwaters is chilling. This is just life on the frontier. Constant adaptation to threats that could destroy everything you've worked for. The storm rages for hours, bringing lightning that makes the hair on your arms stand up and thunder that seems to shake the very earth. Through it all, your parents remain calm, going about necessary indoor tasks like mending clothes and repairing tools. Their resilience is both impressive and sobering. Finally, as evening approaches, the storm begins to ease. Your father ventures out to check on the animals and assess the damage. He returns with mixed news. Chicken coop held. Barn's got a partial collapse on the north side, but the cow's fine. Garden's flooded but might drain off if the rain stays away. He removes his hat, releasing a small cascade of water onto the already damp floor. Creek's high but not rising anymore. Think we can stay put tonight. Dinner is a repeat of lunch, cornmeal bread and thin soup, though this time your mother adds a few precious pinches of salt for flavour. The food is bland but filling, and you're surprised by how good it tastes after a day of physical labour. Hunger, it turns out, is the best seasoning. After dinner, there's still work to do. Items dampened by the leaking roof need to be dried. The floor requires raking to help it dry out. Plans must be made for repairing the barn tomorrow. On the frontier, the workday doesn't end when the sun sets. With no electricity, darkness brings a profound change to the household. The single candle provides meagre illumination, barely enough to see faces across the small room. Your mother takes advantage of the light to do some mending, her fingers working by touch, more than sight, as she repairs a tear in your father's shirt. "Read us something?" she asks him, and he nods, reaching for the Bible on the shelf. This, you realise, is entertainment on the frontier. No television, no internet, no books except perhaps a Bible, an almanac, and maybe a few precious volumes brought from back east. Stories, songs, and conversation are the only diversions available after the sun goes down. Your father reads by candlelight, his voice steady as he recites familiar passages. You notice how both he and your mother have the words nearly memorized, nodding along or sometimes speaking in unison at certain verses. This book isn't just religious text to them. It is literature, comfort, and one of their few connections to the wider world. As the reading continues, you find your eyelids growing heavy despite the hard day and the harder one that surely awaits tomorrow. The physical exhaustion of frontier life is catching up to you, and even the prospect of returning to that bug-infested straw mattress isn't enough to keep you awake. Your mother notices your drooping head. "Off to bed with you," she says, not unkindly. "Dawn comes early, and there's twice the work tomorrow with the storm damage." You stumble to your bed, too tired to even remove your clothes beyond kicking off your boots. As you lie down on the rustling straw, you realise something profound. The romanticised Wild West of movies and books is a fantasy. The reality was this: endless work, constant danger, and the most basic struggle for survival. The settlers who tamed the frontier weren't gunslingers or heroes in the conventional sense. They were ordinary people facing extraordinary hardship with stubborn determination. Their heroism wasn't in shootouts at high noon, but in getting up before dawn, day after day, to wrest a living from unforgiving land with inadequate tools and no safety net. As sleep begins to claim you, you hear your parents speaking softly by the dying candle. "Think the wheat will make it?" your mother asks. "Has to," your father replies simply. "We've got nothing else." That's the reality of the Wild West, not adventure and romance, but the constant nagging question of whether you'll have enough food to survive until next season. The stakes weren't fame and glory, they were life and death. You drift off to sleep with a new appreciation for the pioneers who settled the American frontier and profound gratitude that you'll wake up tomorrow in your comfortable 21st century bed with running water, electricity, and no leaking sod roof in sight. Outside the soddy, the vast prairie stretches under a sky now cleared of storms, the stars brilliantly visible in a way they never are in light-polluted modern cities. It's breathtakingly beautiful and completely indifferent to the tiny human struggles happening beneath it. The wind whispers through the grass, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howls. This is the true Wild West. Beautiful, brutal, and utterly unlike the myth. A place where survival itself was victory and where people discovered the outer limits of their own endurance every single day. The last thing you hear before sleep takes you completely is your father banking the fire in the stove, carefully preserving every precious coal for tomorrow's cooking. In that simple act is everything you need to know about frontier life, the constant conservation of resources, the planning for tomorrow, the understanding that waste of any kind could mean the difference between survival and disaster. As the wind whistles through the cracks in the sod walls, you realize that the most dangerous outlaws on the frontier weren't men with guns. They were starvation, disease, weather, and isolation. And the greatest heroes weren't the ones who won shootouts, but those who managed to create some small measure of security and comfort in a land that offered neither. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, repairing storm damage, tending crops, caring for animals, and the 100 other tasks necessary for survival. But for now, there's the blessed relief of sleep, however uncomfortable the bed. On the frontier, even rest is earned through the sweat of the day's labour. And so ends your first day in the real Wild West, not with a gunfight or a heroic last stand, but with the quiet triumph of having survived until sundown. Out here, sometimes that's victory enough. The rooster's crow might as well be a fire alarm for how quickly it jolts you awake. Your eyes open to the same dirt ceiling, the same earthy smell, and the same aching body, now with exciting new sores from yesterday's unaccustomed labour. For a brief, beautiful moment, you think maybe it was all a dream. But no, you're still here in 1875, lying on a straw mattress in a house made of dirt, about to face another day of frontier survival. Your mother is already up, stoking the cookstove fire. The thin grey light filtering through the oiled paper window suggests it's barely dawn. "About time," she says, noting your open eyes. "Got a heap of work before breakfast, and we're running low on just about everything." You sit up, wincing at the stiffness in your muscles. Yesterday's storm has left the soddy's floor damp and muddy in spots. A slug is slowly making its way across one wall, leaving a glistening trail behind it. "Homie." "What do you mean, running low?" you ask, pulling on the same dirty clothes from yesterday. Your mother gives you a look that's part concern, part exasperation. You hit your head in that storm. We're low on flour, salt, coffee, just about everything that ain't cornmeal. Your pa's ride into town today, but he can't carry much back on one horse. The reality of frontier food supply hits you like a brick. There's no Amazon delivery, no grocery store down the street. The nearest town might be a full day's ride away, and you can only bring back what fits in saddlebags or a small wagon, assuming you can afford to buy anything at all. What about breakfast? Your stomach growls, reminding you how little you ate yesterday. Eggs and cornmeal mush again. We save the flour for trade. So much for pancakes or toast. The frontier diet is repetitive by necessity. You eat what you have, not what you want. Outside, the morning is cool and misty. The storm has passed, leaving puddles across the yard and a fresh, clean smell in the air. Your father is already at work, repairing the damaged barn wall, hammering salvaged planks over the collapse. "Fetch water," he calls when he spots you. "Creek should be running clear by now." The wooden yoke he hands you is designed to carry 2 buckets at once, one hanging from each end, balanced across your shoulders. It looks simple enough in theory, but the reality is a neck-straining, shoulder-crushing implement of torture. You grab 2 wooden buckets and head toward the creek. The walk is only about a quarter mile, but with the muddy ground pulling at your boots, it feels much longer. When you reach the creek, you see that your father was optimistic. The water is still brown and swollen from yesterday's rain. Standing on the slippery bank, you dip 1 bucket into the current. The force of the water nearly pulls it from your grasp, and you almost go tumbling in after it. Heart pounding, you manage to fill both buckets, though water sloshes over the sides as you try to lift them. The yoke balances awkwardly across your shoulders, the full weight of the water making your knees buckle. How did people do this every day? By the time you make it halfway back to the soddy, your shoulders are screaming and water has sloshed out with every step, soaking your pants and boots. Your mother meets you at the door, taking one look at your struggle and sighing. "Put it down before you drop it. We'll need more than that. But rest a minute first." Inside, she explains the water situation. "We need drinking water, cooking water, washing water, and water for the animals. Creek water's fine for most, but drinking and cooking needs to be settled and boiled." She shows you how to put a bit of alum in the water to help settle the silt, then strain it through a cloth. The resulting liquid is clearer, but still has a brownish tint that would send modern health departments into conniptions. "We'll boil this batch for drinking," she says, pouring some into a large kettle on the stove. "Rest is for washing up and the garden." You make 3 more trips to the creek, each one a test of endurance. By the final journey, your shoulders are rubbed raw from the yoke, and your arms feel like they might detach from your body. The idea of turning a tap for instant water has never seemed more miraculous. Back at the soddy, your mother has breakfast ready, the promised cornmeal mush with a single egg stirred in and a cup of coffee so weak it's basically hot brown water. Still, after the water-hauling ordeal, it tastes like a feast. "Your pa's headed to town," she says as you eat. "We need to get food put by while he's gone. Storm's damaged more than we thought." "Put by?" you ask. "Stored. Preserved. Ain't you never listened to a word I said growing up?" She shakes her head. "Storm knocked down half the garden fence. Rabbits got in and had themselves a feast on the young greens. We need to salvage what's left and find what we can to supplement." After breakfast, she leads you to what remains of the garden. Sure enough, the crude fence of branches and twine has collapsed on one side, and many of the tender seedlings have been nibbled to nubs. "Rabbits got the lettuce and most of the peas," she says, surveying the damage, "but the potatoes are still good underground, and they didn't care for the onions, thank the Lord." She hands you a rough basket. "Dig up what onions look ready and gather any dandelion greens you see. We'll make do." Foraging, you quickly learn, is a critical frontier skill. Your mother points out edible plants you'd have walked right past. Wild onions, dandelion greens, something called lamb's quarters, and even some early berries growing in a sunny patch. Nothing is wasted, and everything edible is collected with the same care you might give to gold nuggets. Folks starve with food growing all around them, she explains, expertly identifying plants. Indians taught the first settlers what to eat, but most folks nowadays have forgotten. Your grandma showed me, and I'm showing you. The foraging expedition takes you to the edge of your property, where a small stand of trees grows near the creek. Here, your mother spots mushrooms growing on a fallen log. These are safe, she says, picking whitish fungi from the rotting wood. Those over there'll kill you dead in hours. You got to know the difference. You make a mental note to never ever eat wild mushrooms without an expert guide. Frontier medicine isn't equipped to handle poisonings. Back at the soddy, you watch as your mother takes inventory of the food stores. It's a sobering sight. A small barrel half full of cornmeal, a cloth sack with maybe 5 pounds of flour, a jar of molasses that's mostly empty, a small wooden box of salt, a few strings of dried vegetables hanging from the rafters, some mysterious dried meat in a cloth sack, and that's about it. We'll need to make a stew with what we gathered, she decides, and I'll start a batch of sourdough. Flour's low, but we've still got the starter. She shows you a small crock kept near the stove, containing a bubbling, sour-smelling mixture. This, you learn, is sourdough starter, a living culture of wild yeast and bacteria that leavens bread without the need for commercial yeast. It's one of the frontier's most valuable possessions, often brought from back east and maintained for generations. Your great-grandma brought this starter over the Oregon Trail, she says with reverence. Been keeping it alive near 30 years now. The idea that your fictional frontier family has maintained the same living organism for decades, feeding it regularly with precious flour and water, carefully preserving it through moves and disasters, speaks volumes about frontier priorities. While your mother works with the sourdough, you're sent to check traps your father apparently set before leaving for town. This involves walking the perimeter of the property and checking small wire contraptions hidden in the grass. The first 2 traps are empty, but the third contains a rabbit, now very dead and very real. This isn't a cute cartoon bunny or a pet store rabbit. It's a wild animal caught for food, and someone needs to deal with it. That someone, unfortunately, appears to be you. You carry the trap back to the soddy, trying not to look directly at the lifeless creature inside. Your mother takes one look at your face and almost smiles. Never cleaned a rabbit before? She asks, already knowing the answer. Well, today's your day to learn. What follows is a graphic lesson in frontier food preparation that would horrify most modern sensibilities. The rabbit is strung up, skinned, gutted, and prepared for cooking with brisk efficiency. Your mother wastes nothing. Even the organs are set aside for specific uses, and the fur is carefully preserved for later tanning. Blood makes good fertilizer for the garden, she explains, catching the drips in a bowl, and the bones will go in the stock pot. Can't waste a thing out here. By midday, a pot of what your mother calls prairie stew is simmering on the stove. It contains the rabbit, wild onions, dandelion greens, a few precious potatoes, and the foraged mushrooms, all swimming in a broth made from water and a pinch of salt. The smell is surprisingly appetizing, especially given the graphic preparation you witnessed. Your stomach growls in anticipation. Won't be ready for hours, your mother warns. Good stew needs time. Meanwhile, we got preserving to do. She brings out a wooden bucket you haven't seen before, extracting several fish, apparently caught by your father before he left for town. These too need cleaning and preserving. We'll smoke some and salt the rest, she decides. Smokehouse needs repair after the storm, so we'll have to use the chimney. The next few hours are devoted to food preservation, one of the most critical skills for frontier survival. Without refrigeration, keeping food from spoiling is a constant challenge requiring multiple techniques. You help hang thin strips of fish on strings near the chimney, where smoke from the cook stove will help preserve them. Other pieces are packed in precious salt and stored in a crockery jar. The rabbit skin is stretched on a frame to dry, and even the rabbit's feet are saved. Good luck, your mother explains, though you suspect they have a more practical use she's not mentioning. In fall, we'll do this with everything we can get, she explains. Smoke meat, dry fruit, pickle vegetables, whatever gets us through winter. The concept of winter food storage takes on new meaning when you realize there are no grocery stores to fall back on. Either you preserve enough food during the abundant seasons, or you starve when the snow flies. By mid-afternoon, your mother judges the stew ready. She ladles generous portions into wooden bowls, adding a piece of sourdough bread on the side. The bread isn't what you'd recognize from a modern bakery. It's dense, slightly grey from the unrefined flour, and has a distinctly sour smell. But after a morning of hard work, it's irresistible. The stew is surprisingly good, rich and flavorful despite the simple ingredients. The rabbit tastes nothing like chicken, despite the modern cliché having a stronger, gamier flavor that takes some getting used to. But it's protein, and out here, that's what matters. Save room, your mother advises as you reach for a second helping. Food needs to last, and we don't know when your pa will be back with supplies. This constant calculation, how much to eat now versus how much to save for later, is yet another aspect of frontier life that never makes it into the romanticized tales. Every meal is a strategic decision balancing immediate hunger against future need. After the meal, your mother carefully stores the leftover stew in a covered pot. Without refrigeration, it won't last long, especially as the day warms up. Tomorrow's breakfast, you realize, will likely be reheated stew if it hasn't spoiled overnight. We need to check the root cellar, she says next. Storm might have flooded it. The root cellar turns out to be a small, dark hole dug into the ground behind the soddy, reinforced with scavenged wood and covered with a slanted door. It's the frontier equivalent of a refrigerator, a naturally cool space where food can be stored longer than it would last in the warm soddy. When your mother pulls open the door, your hearts sink. Several inches of muddy water cover the floor of the cellar, and the few potatoes and preserved goods stored there are partially submerged. Damn it all, she mutters, forgetting propriety in the face of disaster. This is bad, real bad. Together, you bail out the water using a bucket and assess the damage. Some potatoes might be salvageable if used immediately. A jar of preserved tomatoes is intact, its wax seal unbroken, but several other jars have cracked or lost their seals, their contents now unsafe to eat. We just lost half our emergency stores, your mother says grimly. Better hope your pa has luck in town, or it's going to be lean times ahead. The loss of food to spoilage, flooding, or pests was a constant threat on the frontier. A single disaster could wipe out months of careful preservation and storage, leaving a family vulnerable to hunger or even starvation. As you help clean up the root cellar, you notice your mother setting aside some of the questionable food items rather than discarding them. Can we still eat those? You ask, pointing to some potatoes with soft spots. We'll cut around the rot, she explains. And these ones with sprouts, we'll plant them instead of eating them. Sometimes you have to sacrifice today's meal for next season's crop. This long-term thinking defined frontier survival. Every decision balances immediate needs against future security, and waste is the enemy. Even items that seem spoiled to modern eyes might have salvageable parts or secondary uses. By late afternoon, your father returns from town, his horse loaded with small but precious supplies. The haul is meagre by modern standards. A small sack of flour, a tiny bag of sugar, some coffee beans, a few packets of seeds to replace what was lost in the garden, and a newspaper that's already 2 weeks old. Prices are up again, he reports grimly. Flour's nearly double what it was last fall. Could only get £5 for what we had to trade. The economics of frontier life were brutal. Without cash, most transactions were based on barter, trading eggs, butter, or homemade items for store-bought necessities. The values fluctuated wildly based on scarcity, and distant events like wars or railroad strikes could cause local prices to skyrocket. "Any news?" your mother asks, carefully storing the new supplies. Sioux are restless up north. Railroads hiring for track work south of here, and the Morgans lost their oldest boy to fever. He delivers these items: potential war, job opportunities, and a neighbour's death, in the same matter-of-fact tone, each just another fact of frontier life. The newspaper is treated as a valuable resource, not just for news, but for practical use. After your father reads it aloud during supper, another serving of the rabbit stew, now with fresh sourdough bread, the paper will be used for everything from wrapping food to serving as toilet paper in the outhouse. Nothing is wasted. Supper conversation centers around food supplies and planning. Your father reports that the general store was low on almost everything, with a supply wagon not expected for another 2 weeks. This means stretching your existing food even further. "We'll set more traps," he decides, "and tomorrow we'll take the wagon to the creek. Might be catfish after that rain." The constant focus on securing food is striking. Unlike in modern life, where food acquisition might take up a couple of hours a week at a grocery store, frontier families spent the majority of their time producing, gathering, preserving, and preparing food. It was their primary occupation, superseding almost everything else. After supper, you help clean up, learning yet another frontier food lesson. Nothing edible is thrown away. The few spoons of leftover stew are carefully stored. The sourdough starter is fed with a small amount of precious flour and water. Even the washing water from the bowls is saved to water the recovering garden plants. As darkness falls, your father reads from the newspaper by candlelight, sharing news of the wider world. There's talk of politics in Washington, Indian wars on the plains, and railroad expansion. It's strange to hear these historical events discussed as current news, with no idea how they'll ultimately resolve. The day's work has left you exhausted, and you find yourself nodding off despite the early hour. The physical demands of frontier life, hauling water, gardening, preserving food, have drained your energy completely. The idea of staying up late is ludicrous when dawn will bring another day of labour. Before retiring to your straw mattress, you take a moment to reflect on what you've learned. Food on the frontier isn't just sustenance, it's security, currency, and constant concern. The precariousness of the food supply shaped every aspect of daily life, from work schedules to social interactions. The pioneers weren't just surviving day to day, they were constantly planning seasons ahead, balancing immediate needs against future security. As you drift off to sleep, your muscles aching from unaccustomed labour and your stomach surprisingly full despite the limited fare, you realise that the Hollywood depictions of frontier life rarely show this aspect of Western settlement. The daily, unglamorous work of food production doesn't make for exciting cinema, but it was the true test of frontier character. The persistence to plant, harvest, hunt, and preserve day after day, season after season, with no guarantee of success. Your mother's voice drifts from across the soddy where she sits mending by candlelight. Weather holds, we'll pick wild strawberries tomorrow, make a preserve if we find enough. Even at day's end, her mind is on food acquisition and preservation. This constant vigilance, this perpetual awareness of hunger as a lurking threat, defined frontier existence in ways modern people can hardly imagine. Outside, a coyote howls in the distance. Inside the soddy, the fire in the cookstove burns low, carefully banked to preserve coals for morning. On your straw mattress, uncomfortably aware of the rustling that suggests you're not alone in the bedding, you close your eyes and try not to think about tomorrow's work. This is the real Wild West, not shootouts and stagecoach robberies, but the quiet heroism of people who wrested food from unforgiving land and survived through ingenuity, knowledge, and sheer determination. Their daily victories weren't marked with notches on six-shooters, but with full storerooms, preserved harvests, and families that made it through another winter. Sleep comes quickly, your body surrendering to exhaustion. The last thing you hear is your mother softly humming a tune as she works, a gentle reminder that even in this harsh existence, there's still room for small moments of peace. Then darkness takes you, and the frontier day ends as it began, with the promise of more work tomorrow, more challenges to face, and the ever-present question of where the next meal will come from. Morning comes with the crowing rooster and aching limbs. You've survived 2 days on the frontier, which feels like something of an achievement given the challenges. Your family's sod house is still standing, you've learned the basics of water collection and food preparation, and you haven't been bitten by anything too dangerous. Yet. Today brings a new reality check about frontier life, the economics of survival. Back in the 21st century, most people work to pay for their wants after their basic needs are covered. Out here in 1875, you work simply to exist. Got a letter from your uncle, your father says over a breakfast of reheated stew. The concept of leftover stew for breakfast would have horrified you in your previous life, but now you're just grateful for the protein. Says the mine's hiring, good wages, $3 a day. Your mother looks up sharply. $3? In cash money? That's what he writes. Your father taps the worn paper. Says they need men who can handle themselves underground. Dangerous work, but steady pay. You nearly choke on your stew. $3 a day sounds like nothing in modern terms, but the way your parents are discussing it, this is serious money. The prospect clearly excites and worries them in equal measure. How long would you be gone? Your mother asks, her face carefully neutral. Through harvest, at least. Maybe into winter. He doesn't meet her eyes. Would mean leaving you two to handle things here? The implications sink in. Your father would be away for months, leaving just you and your mother to maintain the homestead. All the heavy labour, all the protection duties, all the decisions would fall on fewer shoulders, but the promise of actual cash is clearly tempting. How far to the mine, you ask? 3 days' ride west, near the mountains. He folds the letter carefully. Would need to leave end of the week if I'm going. After breakfast, your father takes you outside to check the animal traps and explain more about frontier economics. The harsh reality quickly becomes clear. Most settlers live in a state of constant debt and barter, with actual cash being rare and precious. General Store runs a tab for most folks, he explains as you walk the property boundary. You get what you need, flour, sugar, tools, and pay with what you produce. Eggs, butter, crops come harvest. Problem is, the prices never quite balance out. He stops to reset an empty trap, his weathered hands working the wire mechanism with practiced ease. Store owner sets the prices on both sides, what you buy and what you trade, and somehow you always end up owing more than you bring in. There's no bitterness in his voice, just resignation. Been that way since we got here, 3 years now, and the debt just grows. The trap sets. You continue walking. A rabbit bounds away at your approach, too quick for any hope of catching it. That mine job? You let the question hang. Cash means freedom, he says simply. Cash means paying down the store debt, maybe buying lumber for a proper house before winter. Cash means not wondering if the store owner will cut us off when the debt gets too high. The concept of being cut off sends a chill through you. In a place with no social safety net, no food banks, no government assistance, being denied credit at the general store could be a death sentence if your own food production failed. At midday, a neighbour arrives, the first visitor you've seen since arriving in this strange frontier reality. He rides up on a horse that's seen better days, leading a second animal pulling a small cart. The man himself is thin to the point of gauntness, with a beard streaked with grey, and clothes that have been patched so many times they're more repair than original fabric. "Afternoon, Thomas," your father greets him. "What brings you out this way?" "Trade day," the man, Thomas, replies, climbing stiffly down from his horse. "Sarah's got some butter she thought your missus might want, and heard you might have eggs to spare." This, you realise, is frontier commerce in action. No stores, no cash, just neighbours trading surplus goods to fill each other's needs. Your mother emerges from the soddy, wiping her hands on her apron, and the two women immediately fall into negotiations about butter and eggs while the men talk crops and weather. The bargaining is subtle but intense. Each egg, each pound of butter has real value when you consider the labour that went into producing it. There's no fixed exchange rate, just a mutual understanding of relative worth influenced by need, quality, and relationship. 3 eggs for half a pound of butter seems fair, your mother eventually decides. The trade is made with both women seemingly satisfied with the deal. Thomas has other news to share as well. Railroads hiring 10 miles south, building a spur line to the new cattle yards. $2 a day, they say. Another job opportunity, another potential source of that precious cash. Your father nods thoughtfully but doesn't commit either way. After Thomas leaves, your parents have a quiet, intense discussion about the various work options. The mine pays better, but is more dangerous and further away. The railroad is closer, but offers less money. Staying on the homestead means continuing to scrape by on barter and credit, but keeps the family together and the claim secure. What happens if we leave the homestead unworked, you ask, genuinely curious about frontier property rights. Your father looks grim. Claim jumpers. Government too. Homestead Act says we need to improve the land for 5 years to get title. Leave it too long, someone reports it abandoned, we lose everything. The precariousness of frontier property ownership is yet another reality check. Without regular presence and work, a family could lose their entire investment of time and labour. The land itself has no value without the improvements, the cleared fields, the buildings, the fences that represent years of back-breaking work. In the afternoon, your father takes you to check the crops, what's left of them after the storm damage. Walking through the fields, he explains the economics of frontier farming in terms that would make a modern accountant weep. Put in 5 bushels of seed wheat this spring, he says, looking over the green shoots just beginning to grow. If weather holds and locusts stay away, might get 30 bushels at harvest. Keep 5 for next year's seed, use 10 for our own flour, sell the rest to the mill for maybe 50 cents a bushel. You do the quick math. 15 bushels at 50 cents each would yield $7.50 for an entire season's work, less than 3 days' wages at the mine your uncle mentioned. Why farm at all, you ask? Why not just work for wages? Your father gives you a look that suggests this is a question only a fool or someone raised with no understanding of frontier realities would ask. Wages can stop, company can fold, mine can collapse. He gestures at the field. Land feeds you no matter what, long as you work it right. Might not make you rich, but you won't starve if the jobs dry up. This fundamental reality, that self-sufficiency was the only true security, shaped the mindset of frontier settlers. Cash work was a supplement to, not a replacement for, the subsistence farming that kept them alive. As the afternoon wears on, another visitor arrives. This one less welcome. A man in a dusty black coat rides up, his horse better fed than Thomas's was. Without dismounting, he hands your father a folded paper. Tax assessment, he announces, due by end of summer. County's building a new courthouse. After he rides away, your father unfolds the paper and his face darkens. $2.40, he mutters. Where the hell are we supposed to get that? The tax bill, a paltry sum by modern standards, represents another economic pressure on the frontier family. With little cash income, even small government levies could be devastating, and unlike modern times, tax collection on the frontier could be brutally direct. Fail to pay, and you might lose your livestock, tools, or even your land. Could sell the cow, your mother suggests without enthusiasm, having joined the conversation. Your father shakes his head. Without milk and butter, we'd just end up deeper in debt at the store. Might have to take that mine job after all. By evening, the economic reality of frontier life has become painfully clear. Your family is caught in multiple binds, needing cash for taxes and store debt, but reliant on subsistence farming for basic survival, wanting to improve their situation with a proper house, but unable to afford lumber without wage work that would take your father away from the homestead. Theoretically owning their land through the Homestead Act, but constantly at risk of losing it if they can't meet payment or improvement requirements. The romantic notion of pioneers as independent settlers beholden to no one has evaporated completely. The reality is a complex web of debts, obligations, and vulnerable legal claims that keep frontier families in a state of perpetual economic insecurity. Supper is simple. More sourdough bread, the last of the stew, and some dandelion greens your mother collected. The food reflects the economic reality. Eat what you can produce or forage. Save what little money you have for absolute necessities that can't be made at home. After the meal, your father takes out a slate and pencil, paper being too precious to waste on calculations, and begins working through the family's economic situation. The figures are sobering. Store debt of nearly $15, property tax of $2.40, seed for next season, essential supplies for winter. The total needed far exceeds any realistic projection of what the farm might produce in tradable surplus. The mine it is, he finally decides. I'll leave Saturday. Should be able to work 4 months before the snow gets too deep for travel. Might clear $40, $50 if I'm careful. Your mother nods, her face revealing little of what must be a storm of emotions at the prospect of her husband leaving for a third of the year. I'll start getting your things ready. This pattern, men leaving for wage work while women maintained the homestead, was common on the frontier. It created a strange dual economy, with men engaged in cash labour while women managed the subsistence production that kept families alive. Both were essential, but the work was sharply divided along gender lines. The next morning brings a new type of frontier work experience. A neighbour arrives, a broad-shouldered man named Miller, with news that his barn raising is scheduled for the following week. Could use every hand available, he tells your father. Got the Johnsons and the Petersons committed already. Thought your boy here might help too. He nods in your direction. Barn raisings were one of the few examples of communal labour on the otherwise individualistic frontier. Neighbours would gather to help construct a building that would be impossible for a single family to manage alone. The work wasn't paid in cash, but operated on a principle of reciprocity. You help your neighbours, and they help you when your turn comes. We'll be there, your father promises. Might be the last big job I do before heading to the mines. Miller's expression shifts slightly at the mention of the mines. Heard they had a collapse last month. 3 men didn't come out. Your father nods grimly. Heard the same, but they're paying cash, and the taxman won't take eggs or wheat. After Miller leaves, you help with the day's chores, now familiar enough with the routine to work without constant direction, hauling water, feeding animals, checking traps, weeding what remains of the garden. The labour never ends, but at least you're developing calluses to replace the blisters on your hands. As you work, your father explains more about frontier economics. Land's the only real wealth out here, he says, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. Get enough acres under cultivation. Eventually you can hire labour instead of doing it all yourself. That's the dream. Becoming a landowner instead of just a worker. But that dream, you realise, was only attainable for a lucky few. Most settlers remained caught in the cycle of subsistence and debt, working their small claims and supplementing with wage labour when necessary. The Jeffersonian ideal of a nation of independent yeoman farmers collided with the harsh economic realities of frontier capitalism. By midday, another visitor arrives. This one, unexpected and unwelcome. A man in a suit far too fine for frontier conditions rides up on a horse that's clearly well-fed and groomed. Without greeting, he surveys your family's modest homestead with obvious disdain. "Reynolds!" Your father acknowledges him coldly. "What brings the bank all the way out here?" The man, Reynolds, produces a leather folder and extracts a document. "Just making my rounds, Mason, reminding folks of their obligations." He hands the paper to your father. "Bank's called in the notes on several properties in the county. Thought you should know yours might be next." After he rides away, your father crumples the paper in his fist, his knuckles white with anger. "Vultures," he mutters, "just waiting for folks to fail." This, too, was part of frontier economics, the constant pressure from banks and speculators eager to acquire land from struggling homesteaders. The homestead itself, with all the improvements made through years of labour, was valuable enough to attract predatory attention from those with capital, but without the willingness to do the physical work of settlement. What happens if they call in the note, you ask, not entirely understanding the frontier banking terminology. Your father sighs, means they demand immediate payment of the full amount borrowed, not just the regular instalments, and since nobody out here has that kind of cash sitting around, they get to seize the property. He looks around at the modest homestead, his expression a mix of pride and worry. Everything we've built, everything we've worked for, gone. The reality of frontier financing is another shock. Many settlers took loans to establish their homesteads for seed, tools, livestock, or supplies, with the property itself as collateral. Unlike modern mortgages with fixed terms and regulated practices, frontier loans could be called in at the bank's discretion, often when the land had increased in value due to the settlers' improvements or when railroad development made the location more desirable. "How much do we owe?" you ask. $50. The sum clearly pains him to say aloud. Borrowed when we first claimed the land, been paying interest for 3 years, but never able to touch the principal amount. $50, a sum a modern person might spend on dinner without thought, represented an almost insurmountable debt for a frontier family. With annual cash income measured in single digits, paying off such a loan would take years under the best circumstances. The mine job, you begin, might save us if I can work the full season and if they pay what they promise. He doesn't sound optimistic, but plenty of men go to the mines with dreams of clearing their debts and come back with nothing, if they come back at all. The afternoon brings yet another dimension of frontier economics, the peddler. A wagon arrives, driven by a cheerful man with an improbable moustache and a hat that's seen better days. The sides of his wagon fold down to reveal shelves of goods, fabrics, tools, medicine, seeds, and various trinkets. Yes. Unlike the general store in town, the peddler deals primarily in cash, though he's willing to consider certain items in trade, particularly eggs, butter, and handcrafted goods that can be sold elsewhere. His prices are higher than the stores, but he brings goods directly to isolated homesteads, saving families the time and expense of a town journey. Your mother approaches the wagon with clear interest but equal caution. Got any needles? Mine's nearly worn through. The peddler produces a paper of needles. Finest Sheffield steel, 20 cents for the lot. Highway robbery, your mother mutters, but her tone lacks conviction. Good needles are essential for the constant mending that keeps frontier clothing functional. After careful consideration of the family's meagre resources, she trades 2 eggs and one of her hand-knitted dishcloths for a single needle, a small cake of soap, and a packet of sugar candy. This last item clearly intended as a special treat for you, though you've done nothing to deserve such luxury. The peddler, his business concluded, offers news along with his goods. Railroads pushing west faster than expected. Land prices are jumping ahead of the line. Might be worth holding on to your claim a while longer, even with the bank making noises. This information, more valuable than any physical goods he carries, causes your father to reconsider his plans. If land values are rising, perhaps taking on additional debt to hold the homestead might be worthwhile, despite the risk. As evening approaches, your family gathers for a council on their economic future. The options are limited and all involve significant trade-offs. Your father could take the mine job, earning cash but leaving the homestead vulnerable. He could seek work on the railroad, earning less but staying closer to home. They could sell assets, the cow, a horse, tools, to pay immediate debts but cripple their productive capacity, or they could try to secure additional credit to weather the current crisis, deepening their long-term debt but preserving their claim. What would you do? Your father asks you directly, surprising you with the invitation to weigh in on such an important decision. The question feels impossibly heavy. Each option has potentially life-altering consequences for this frontier family. Even with your advanced knowledge from the future, you can't predict which path would ultimately prove best in this uncertain environment. You hesitate, acutely aware of your ignorance of frontier realities despite the crash course of the last few days. I'd take the mine job. Cash seems to be what we need most right now. Your father nods slowly. That's my thinking too. Not what I'd choose if there was a better option, but there isn't. He turns to your mother. Can you and the boy manage here? She straightens her shoulders. We'll manage. Always have. The decision made, the evening turns to preparation. Your father will leave for the mines in 3 days after helping with the neighbour's barn raising. Plans are laid for his absence. What crops need tending, which repairs can't wait, how to handle potential emergencies. The conversation is practical, focused on survival, with little room for sentiment despite the months of separation ahead. As darkness falls and the single candle is lit, you find yourself reflecting on what you've learned about frontier economics. The popular image of self-sufficient pioneers carving independent lives from the wilderness has given way to a more complex reality. Homesteaders caught in webs of debt and obligation, their independence constrained by banks, taxes, and the fundamental need to participate in larger economic systems for survival. The true heroes of Western settlement weren't lone individuals conquering the wilderness, but families making impossible choices and sacrifices in pursuit of long-term security. Their struggles weren't primarily against Indians or outlaws, but against economic forces largely beyond their control. Weather that destroyed crops, banks that called in loans, companies that paid less than promised or folded entirely. As you prepare for sleep on your now familiar straw mattress, you find yourself grateful for the economic safety nets of modern life: unemployment insurance, consumer protection laws, regulated banking that most people take for granted. The frontier's economic reality was a constant high-wire act with no safety net, where a single setback could mean ruin. Outside, night creatures call in the darkness. Inside the soddy, your parents speak softly about their plans and hopes, their voices barely audible across the small room. This too is the real Wild West, not the glamour of gunfights or the freedom of the open range, but ordinary people making difficult decisions in a system that offered few good options and no guarantees. Sleep comes more easily now that your body is adapting to the physical demands of frontier life. Your last thoughts before drifting off are of the mine your father will soon enter, dark, dangerous, and promising either salvation or disaster for this family hanging by an economic thread. The day of the barn raising dawns bright and clear. You wake before the rooster crows, your body now somehow anticipating the early frontier schedule. The straw mattress still rustles with unwelcome residents, but you've almost gotten used to sharing your bed with insects. Almost. The barn raising is a community event bringing together scattered homesteaders from miles around. By mid-morning, wagons and riders begin arriving at the Miller property, a homestead slightly larger and more established than your family's, with a proper wooden house instead of a soddy. Men arrive ready for work, women bearing food for the communal meal that will follow, and children excited for the rare opportunity to play with others their age. You note how even in frontier isolation, humans seek community and connection. The Miller family has prepared for weeks, cutting and preparing lumber, digging post holes, gathering necessary tools. Now, with the help of neighbors, they'll accomplish in a single day what would take months for one family alone. Your father introduces you around as the work groups form. The men size you up with quick glances, assessing your potential contribution. You're assigned to a team lifting the heavy support beams where your father can keep an eye on you. The work is brutally hard, hoisting massive timbers, holding them in place while others secure joints, climbing to precarious heights to attach roof supports. By midday, your muscles scream in protest and sweat has soaked through your clothes despite the mild temperature. This is labour of a different order than the daily chores you've experienced so far, sustained, intensive, and dangerous. During a brief water break, you overhear two men discussing a recent accident at a similar barn raising 20 miles east. Beams slipped and caught Jensen right across the chest, one says quietly. Dead before they could even lay him down, the other nods grimly. Left a wife and 4 little ones, communities taking up a collection. This casual mention of death and the matter-of-fact discussion of how survivors will manage is yet another jarring reminder of frontier realities. In a world without safety regulations, without emergency services, without insurance or workers' compensation, accidents were frequent and often fatal. What happens to a family if the father dies? You ask your father privately as you return to work. He doesn't sugarcoat the answer. Depends. If they've got older boys who can work the land, they might keep the homestead. If not, usually the woman and young ones go back to family if they have any, or remarry quick if they can, or lose everything. The cold calculus of frontier survival didn't allow for long grieving periods. A single-parent household simply couldn't manage the physical labor required for subsistence, making quick remarriage an economic necessity rather than a romantic choice. By mid-afternoon, the barn's frame stands complete, a testament to communal effort and frontier engineering. Men begin attaching the roof boards while others construct the walls. Women have prepared a feast laid out on makeshift tables, and workers rotate through to eat in shifts. The meal is the most abundant you've seen since arriving in this time. Fried chicken, biscuits, cornbread, preserved fruits, and even a few pies. In a world of general scarcity, communities pooled resources for special occasions, creating temporary abundance that would be remembered during leaner times. As you eat, a woman nearby suddenly cries out. Her young son, perhaps 4 years old, has fallen and gashed his arm on a discarded tool. Blood flows freely from a jagged wound that clearly needs immediate attention. "Get Martha!" someone shouts, and an older woman quickly makes her way through the gathered crowd. Martha, you soon learn, is the closest thing to a doctor within 20 miles, a midwife with knowledge of herbs and basic medical treatments. She examines the crying child with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound with water and applying pressure to slow the bleeding. "Needs stitching," she announces. "Someone heat a needle." What follows is frontier medicine in its rawest form. A sewing needle is held in a fire until glowing, then threaded with ordinary sewing thread. The child is held firmly by his father while Martha makes quick, neat stitches to close the wound. No anesthesia, no antiseptics beyond the brief flame sterilization, no antibiotics to prevent infection. The boy screams throughout the procedure, his cries echoing across the homestead. His mother sings softly to him, her voice shaking while tears stream down her face. When it's done, Martha applies a paste of herbs and wraps the wound with a clean cloth. Keep it dry, she instructs the parents. Change the wrapping daily. If it starts to smell or he gets fever, bring him to me immediately. The entire medical emergency has been handled in less than 15 minutes, and work on the barn resumes almost immediately. The injured child is settled in a shady spot with a piece of candy to soothe him, already being distracted by other children showing him a frog they've caught. Does that happen often? You ask your mother, who has watched the proceedings with concern but not shock. "Injuries, all the time," she replies. "You learn to handle what you can and pray for what you can't. Martha's good with wounds and birthing, but there's plenty she can't fix." The casualness with which frontier people accepted medical emergencies and their often limited options for treatment is sobering. In a world before antibiotics, before blood transfusions, before modern surgery and anesthesia, many conditions that would be routinely treatable in your time were potential death sentences. As the afternoon wears on, you notice a young woman sitting apart from the main gathering, a shawl wrapped around her despite the warm day. Her face is flushed and she coughs occasionally into a handkerchief that comes away spotted with blood. "Consumption," your mother says quietly, following your gaze. "Miller's eldest daughter, been sick since winter." Tuberculosis, consumption in frontier terminology, was one of the most feared diseases of the era. Its wasting progression was both visible and inexorable, and frontier treatments were largely ineffective. The isolation of homesteads provided some protection against contagious diseases, but community gatherings like today's barn raising created opportunities for transmission. Is there no treatment, you ask, knowing the answer but hoping frontier wisdom might have some solution unknown to history books? Your mother shakes her head. Some say mountain air helps, others try all manner of tonics and treatments. Mostly, it just takes who it wants. She makes a subtle sign of the cross. God's will. This fatalism, this acceptance of disease as inevitable and often unstoppable, defined frontier attitudes toward health. Without germ theory, without effective medications, without diagnostic tools beyond basic observation, illness was often viewed as a matter of luck or divine intervention rather than a problem with scientific solutions. As the day progresses, you learn more about frontier health challenges through casual conversations. One woman mentions losing 3 children to diphtheria in a single week. A man shows a twisted arm that never healed properly after a break. An elderly homesteader moves with the characteristic shuffle of someone who has survived a stroke, half his face frozen in a permanent droop. Each story, told matter-of-factly as part of ordinary conversation, would represent a major medical crisis in modern times. Here, they're just the expected hazards of frontier life, accepted with the same resignation as bad weather or poor harvests. By late afternoon, the barn is substantially complete, a triumph of communal effort. The Miller family will finish the details in the coming days, but the structure stands sound and ready for use. Celebratory spirits rise as the work winds down, with someone producing a fiddle and another a harmonica. As impromptu dancing begins, you notice Martha, the midwife, healer, now sitting with the consumptive girl, listening to her chest and mixing some herbal preparation in a cup. The contrast is striking. Joy and community celebration happening just yards from someone fighting a likely fatal illness. Your mother joins Martha briefly, and you overhear fragments of their conversation about medicinal herbs and treatments. It becomes clear that frontier women were the primary healthcare providers for most families, maintaining knowledge of plants and home remedies passed down through generations. Willow bark tea for fever and pain, Martha explains to your mother, who nods seriously. Comfrey poultice for breaks and sprains, elderberry syrup for winter coughs. Start preparing it now before the berries are gone. This exchange of medical knowledge was crucial in a world without doctors, pharmacies, or medical texts. Each woman was responsible for her family's healthcare, with occasional help from more knowledgeable neighbours like Martha when available. As the gathering begins to disperse, families heading home before darkness makes travel dangerous, you help load your family's wagon with the few tools and dishes they brought. Your muscles ache from the day's labour, and a splinter in your palm throbs painfully. A minor injury by frontier standards, but a constant reminder of how even small health issues could become major problems without proper care. The ride home is quiet, all of you exhausted from the day's work. Your father breaks the silence occasionally to point out plants with medicinal properties growing along the trail, knowledge you realize might be literally life-saving in this environment. Echinacea there, he notes, indicating a purple-flowered plant. Good for infections. And that's yarrow. Stops bleeding. Your ma knows how to prepare them. Back at your soddy, the evening routine feels almost comfortingly familiar after the social intensity of the day. As your mother prepares a simple supper, she checks your splinter-wounded hand, her touch surprisingly gentle. Needs to come out before it festers, she decides, and proceeds to extract the splinter with a needle sterilized in the cooking fire. The procedure is painful but quick, and she applies a dab of some strong-smelling salve afterward. "What's that?" you ask, sniffing the pungent ointment. "Garlic, honey, and a few other things," she replies vaguely. "Keeps infection away." Modern science would eventually confirm the antibacterial properties of both garlic and honey, but in 1875 such treatments were based on observation and tradition rather than laboratory testing. They worked often enough to remain in use, though their effectiveness was inconsistent by modern standards. After supper, your father announces he'll be leaving for the mine tomorrow instead of waiting another day as planned. "Best to get there early and secure a position," he explains. "Competition gets fierce when word spreads about hiring." This accelerated departure creates a somber mood. The dangers of mining were well known: cave-ins, explosions, toxic gases, long-term lung damage, and no one pretends this is anything but a necessary risk. Your mother begins packing his few spare clothes and preparing travel food without comment, her expression carefully neutral. As darkness falls and preparations continue, you notice your father taking your mother aside for a private conversation. Though you can't hear their words, you can guess the content. Final instructions in case he doesn't return, arrangements for the homestead's future, perhaps even emotional farewells that frontier stoicism doesn't allow to be expressed openly. Later, as you lie on your straw mattress waiting for sleep, your mother sits nearby grinding dried plants with a mortar and pestle by candlelight. The rhythmic scraping sound is oddly soothing, making medicine for your pa to take with him, she explains, seeing your curious gaze. Mining camps are rife with illness. Men packed together, poor food, bad water, no proper privies. She adds another dried leaf to her mixture. This might help keep him well. The idea of sending someone into a known health hazard with only a small pouch of herbs for protection seems hopelessly inadequate, but it's all frontier medicine can offer. No vaccines, no preventive antibiotics, no sophisticated diagnostic tools, just traditional remedies and hope. As you drift towards sleep, the contrast between modern and frontier healthcare has never seemed starker. In your time, the splinter in your hand would warrant an antiseptic wipe and perhaps a bandage, with antibiotics available if infection developed. Here, that same minor injury could potentially lead to blood poisoning and death without proper care. Your mother finishes her preparation and stores the ground herbs in a small cloth pouch which she sets aside for tomorrow. The simple act contains all the love and concern she cannot express directly, a frontier wife's attempt to protect her husband from dangers beyond her control. Morning comes early as always. Your father is already up and dressed when you open your eyes, checking his few possessions for the journey ahead. A small pack contains spare clothes, the herb pouch your mother prepared, some hardtack and jerky for the journey, and little else. Travel light was the frontier rule, especially when the destination was uncertain. Breakfast is solemn and brief. Cornmeal mush sweetened with a precious spoonful of molasses, a luxury saved for this occasion. No one speaks much, the impending separation hanging heavy in the air. After the meal, your father provides final instructions. Check the north fence line today. Storm loosen some posts. Traps need checking daily. If the miller boy comes by with that plough part I mowed, have him leave it by the barn. These practical directions stand in for the emotional farewell that frontier culture discouraged. Men didn't speak of feelings or fears even when facing potentially deadly work. The Stoicism wasn't just cultural preference, but psychological protection. In a world where death was commonplace, emotional walls helped people function despite constant loss. As your father saddles his horse, you notice him slipping a revolver into his saddlebag, a reminder that human dangers were also part of frontier travel. Roads between settlements were prime territory for bandits who knew travelers might carry cash or valuable goods. The actual goodbye is brief and restrained. Your father embraces your mother quickly, then clasps your shoulder with a firm hand. "Take care of things," he says simply. "Be the man of the house till I return." Then he mounts his horse and rides away without looking back, his figure growing smaller as he crosses the prairie toward the distant mountains where the mine awaits. Your mother watches until he disappears from sight, then turns briskly to the day's tasks, her expression giving nothing away. "Well," she says practically, "that fence won't fix itself. Best get started." This, too, is frontier medicine in its way, the psychological adaptation that allowed people to continue functioning despite separation, uncertainty, and ever-present danger. There was no time for extended grieving or worry, no luxury of emotional indulgence when survival required constant work. As you help with the day's chores, your mother begins educating you more thoroughly about frontier healthcare, knowledge you'll need in your role as temporary man of the house. "Snake bite," she says as you check traps near a rocky outcropping. Cut across the marks with a clean knife, suck out the poison and spit it away, then poultice with plantain leaves. These ones here. She points to a common weed you'd have overlooked. Bind it tight and keep the limb below the heart. The procedure she describes is partly effective, partly dangerous by modern standards, potentially introducing infection through the cut, risking poison absorption through mouth tissues, but also physically removing some venom through suction. Like many frontier treatments, it was better than nothing, but far from ideal. "Dog days are coming," she continues as you work. "August fever season. We'll need to boil all drinking water and cover food from flies. Sleep with windows papered shut, no matter the heat." The connection between mosquitoes and diseases like malaria wasn't yet established in frontier medicine, but observational evidence had taught settlers that certain preventive measures reduced illness during late summer fever season. The advice about boiling water was particularly sound, though the full understanding of waterborne bacteria was still developing. By midday, you've learned a dizzying array of frontier medical information: how to treat burns with raw potato, how to set simple fractures with splints, which plants stop diarrhea and which induce vomiting when poison is swallowed, how to recognize the early signs of scarlet fever, diphtheria, and measles, and dozens of other practical remedies for common ailments. "Knowledge keeps you alive out here," your mother explains as you pause for a simple lunch of cornbread and wild greens. "Doctor's 2 days' ride away, if he's even home when you get there. Most times you're your own physician." The reality of frontier healthcare was largely self-sufficiency by necessity. Professional medical help was too distant, too expensive, and often not significantly more effective than home treatments. Families developed their own medical knowledge through experience, tradition, and sometimes tragic trial and error. After lunch, your chores take you to the creek for water. While filling the buckets, you notice something disturbing: several dead fish floating near the bank, their white bellies exposed to the sun. Concerned, you report this to your mother upon returning to the soddy. Her reaction is immediate and alarmed. "Don't use that water," she exclaims, dumping the buckets you've just carried back. "Not for drinking, not for washing, not for anything. Someone's likely dumping mine tailings upstream." Water contamination was a serious and common health threat on the frontier. Without environmental regulations or understanding of toxic chemicals, industrial activities like mining often poisoned water sources used by downstream settlements. The dead fish were nature's warning system, one your mother was wise enough to heed. "What do we do for water?" you ask, suddenly aware of how dependent you are on the creek that has now become a potential threat. "We've got the rain barrel from the storm," she says, thinking quickly, "and the Miller place has a good well. We'll have to haul from there until we know the creek is safe again." This adaptation, finding alternative water sources when primary ones are compromised, was yet another aspect of frontier survival. The flexibility to change practices quickly in response to environmental threats was essential when so many dangers went unseen until they caused harm. By late afternoon, a new concern arises. Dark clouds build on the horizon, and the air grows still and heavy with unusual warmth. Your mother watches the sky with evident worry. "Green tinge to those clouds," she observes. "Could be a twister brewing." Tornadoes were particularly feared on the prairie, where flat terrain offered no natural shelter and sod houses provided minimal protection against violent winds. Without weather forecasting or warning systems, settlers relied on observational signs and traditional knowledge to anticipate dangerous storms. Your mother begins preparations immediately, sending you to secure loose items around the homestead while she gathers essential supplies inside the soddy. A storm lamp is filled with precious oil, water containers are topped off, and a small bundle of key possessions. Documents, family Bible, photographs, is placed near the door for quick retrieval if necessary. "If it comes to it, we head for the root cellar," she instructs. "Twisters can take a soddy right off its foundation, but they can't pull up the ground itself." This emergency planning, this constant readiness for disaster, was another form of frontier health care. In a world without emergency services or disaster relief, preparation and quick decision-making were often the only defenses against nature's dangers. As evening approaches, the storm blows past without developing into the feared tornado, though heavy rain once again tests the soddy's roof. The leaks seem fewer this time. Your repair work after the previous storm has helped, but the interior still grows damp and chilly as darkness falls. Your mother builds up the fire in the cook stove, creating welcome warmth against the dampness. "Can't afford to get the ague," she explains, using the frontier term for fever and chills that might indicate malaria or other infections. "Not with your pa gone and all the work to do." This practical approach to preventive health, keeping warm and dry to avoid illness, reflected frontier understanding that sickness wasn't just a personal misfortune, but a threat to the entire family's survival. A homestead couldn't function with its primary workers incapacitated, making illness prevention a practical necessity rather than just a matter of comfort. Supper is simple but satisfying. Cornbread with the last of the rabbit stew, reheated and extended with wild onions and some early peas salvaged from the garden. The meal reinforces another aspect of frontier health, the direct connection between diet and wellness that settlers understood intuitively. "Body needs meat to stay strong," your mother says as she serves the stew, "and greens to keep the blood right. That's why winter's so hard. Nothing fresh by February, and that's when sickness takes hold." The seasonal nature of frontier illness, with scurvy, pneumonia, and other conditions peaking during winter months, reflected both the biological realities of vitamin deficiency and the social conditions of confinement in small, poorly ventilated spaces oases during cold weather. After supper, with rain still pattering on the sod roof, your mother takes up her mending by lamplight. The domestic scene feels almost cozy, despite the primitive conditions, creating a moment of relative peace in the otherwise harsh frontier existence. "Your pa had the marsh fever 2 summers ago?" she says suddenly, her hands continuing their steady work. "Shaking and burning up by turns, couldn't keep food down, thought we'd lose him for sure." This rare personal revelation, this acknowledgement of past vulnerability, offers a glimpse into the emotional reality behind frontier stoicism. The constant proximity to death shaped relationships and outlook in ways modern people can hardly imagine. What happened, you ask, drawn into this glimpse of your family's history? "Martha came with her willow bark and fever remedies. I kept cold compresses on him day and night." Her voice remains matter-of-fact, but her hands still briefly on her mending. 7 days he burned with it. On the 8th the fever broke. The simple narrative contains volumes of unspoken emotion, the exhaustion of round-the-clock care, the fear of impending loss, the desperate hope that home remedies would be enough, the relief when recovery finally came. This was the lived experience of frontier illness, intense, personal, and utterly lacking in the clinical distance of modern healthcare. "That's why we keep willow bark dried and ready," she concludes practically, resuming her stitching. "Never know when fever will strike again. This preparedness, this constant readiness for medical emergencies defined frontier healthcare. Without access to immediate professional help, families maintained their own medical supplies and knowledge, prepared for the crises they knew would eventually come." As the evening deepens and lamplight casts long shadows across the Soddy's interior, you realise how fundamentally different frontier health perspectives were from modern attitudes. In your time, health is often viewed as the default state, with illness as an unexpected interruption. On the frontier, the opposite was true. Illness was expected, while continued health was the surprising blessing. Your mother finishes her mending and banks the fire for the night, her movements practiced and efficient. Another day of frontier life has passed, a day without modern medicine, without sanitation standards, without health insurance or antibiotics or emergency services. Yet, people survived, adapting to threats and developing systems of care that, while primitive by later standards, represented the best knowledge available at the time. As you settle onto your straw mattress, listening to the rain on the sod roof and the occasional distant rumble of thunder, you reflect on what you've learned. The healthcare challenges of frontier life weren't just about treating illness, but about maintaining function in the face of constant threat. Survival required not just physical remedies but psychological adaptations, the stoicism, the practicality, the focus on work despite fear or grief. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new challenges, and potentially new health concerns. Without your father's strength and knowledge, the burden of homestead maintenance falls more heavily on you and your mother. The work must continue despite his absence, just as frontier life continued despite illness, injury, and loss. Outside, the storm begins to ease, rain softening to a gentle patter. Inside the soddy, your mother extinguishes the lamp to save precious oil, plunging the interior into darkness. In the black of a frontier night, without even the ambient light pollution of modern times, sleep comes quickly to bodies exhausted by the day's labour. Your last thought before drifting off is of your father, now likely camping somewhere on his journey to the mines, exposed to the same storm and countless other hazards of frontier travel. His fate, like so much in this harsh world, lies beyond your knowledge or control, a fundamental uncertainty that frontier people lived with every day. A week passes in your father's absence, each day blending into the next in a rhythm of endless chores and small emergencies. The fence breaks again, a fox takes one of the chickens, rain delays the planting of replacement seedlings in the storm-damaged garden. Through it all, you and your mother adapt and endure, falling into the patterns of frontier resilience that defined this era. On the 8th day, as you're repairing the chicken coop, you hear the approach of horses, multiple riders by the sound. Your mother emerges from the soddy, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Visitors are rare, and unexpected visitors even rarer. 3 riders appear over the low rise to the east, 2 men and a woman. As they draw closer, your mother relaxes slightly. "It's just the Johnsons," she says, and looks like Reverend Parker with them. The visitors dismount in the yard, exchanging greetings with your mother. The older man, Reverend Parker, is dressed in a black coat that's seen better days but still marks him as someone of relative status. The Johnson couple are clearly neighbours from their weathered appearance and practical clothing. "Circuit's brought me round again, Mrs. Mason," the Reverend explains, removing his hat respectfully. "Thought we'd check on you, what with your husband gone to the mines." This, you realise, is frontier social services in action, the community checking on potentially vulnerable members during hardship. Without government assistance programs or formal support structures, neighbours and travelling preachers filled the gap, offering practical help and maintaining social bonds. Your mother invites them inside, an indication of both frontier hospitality and the visitor's status. The soddy feels crowded with 5 people, but no one comments on the humble surroundings. On the frontier, pretension about living conditions was pointless when everyone faced similar challenges. Mrs. Johnson has brought a gift, a jar of preserved peaches, golden and gleaming in their glass container. The simple present represents significant generosity in a world where such luxuries were rare and hard-won. "Thought you might enjoy these," she says, placing the jar on the rough table. "Last year's harvest, but they kept well." Your mother receives the gift with appropriate appreciation, immediately offering coffee in return, stretched with roasted grain to make the precious beans last longer, but still the expected hospitality for visitors. As the coffee brews on the cook stove, conversation turns to community news and events. This social exchange, you realise, is not just pleasantry, but a crucial information network in a world without telephones, newspapers, or internet. "Hendersons lost their youngest to croup," Mrs. Johnson reports soberly. "Buried him Tuesday last. Lord rest his soul," your mother responds, making the sign of the cross. "That's the 2nd child they've lost this year." The casualness with which child mortality is discussed, sad but not shocking, highlights another frontier reality. In an era when approximately 1 in 4 children died before age 5, grief was a common experience, acknowledged but not allowed to interrupt the business of survival. "Miller's planning a social when his barn's finished," Mr. Johnson offers, moving to lighter topics. 2 weeks from Saturday, weather permitting, dancing and a potluck. This news brings a smile to your mother's face, a rare expression of anticipation. "Been a while since we had a proper gathering. Will there be music?" Jensen's boy is bringing his fiddle, and I hear tell the new family from Ohio has a guitar player among them. The planned social gathering, a barn dance and community meal, represents one of the few recreational opportunities in frontier life. These events served multiple purposes, providing entertainment, strengthening community bonds, offering courting opportunities for young people, and creating a temporary respite from the isolation and hardship of daily existence. Reverend Parker sips his coffee and turns the conversation to more spiritual matters. "I'll be holding service at the schoolhouse Sunday week. Hope to see you there, Mrs. Mason. The Lord's word brings comfort in trying times." Religion was a central organizing force in frontier communities, providing not just spiritual guidance but social structure and shared identity. The traveling preacher or circuit rider might visit each settlement only monthly or even less frequently, making church services special occasions that combined worship, socializing, and community business. "We'll be there, Reverend," your mother promises. "Been too long since we heard a proper sermon." As the conversation continues, you notice how much information is exchanged in these seemingly casual interactions. Weather patterns observed by families living 10 miles away, a new merchant setting up shop in the nearest town, a family heading back east after failing to make their homestead profitable, potential jobs for young men at the sawmill just established near the railroad. Each piece of news could affect survival or opportunity in the interconnected frontier economy. After the coffee is finished, the men step outside to examine your repair work on the chicken coop and fence, offering suggestions and commenting on your efforts. This too is part of frontier social systems, the sharing of practical knowledge and skills between neighbors, ensuring that the collective wisdom of the community benefits all its members. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson and your mother engage in their own form of knowledge exchange, discussing garden progress, food preservation techniques, and home remedies for common ailments. Their conversation is dense with practical information, from the best time to harvest specific herbs to methods for keeping flour free from weevils. When the visitors prepare to leave an hour later, there's a final exchange of community obligations. "We'll keep an eye out for word from the mines," Mr. Johnson promises. "Any news of your husband, we'll get it to you straight away. And if you need a hand with anything heavy, you send word," Mrs. Johnson adds. "Our boys can ride over." These offers aren't just politeness, but a form of frontier insurance, a system of mutual aid that helped families survive crises and labor shortages. Today's assistance freely given would be reciprocated when the Johnsons faced their own challenges, creating a network of support without formal structure. After the visitors depart, your mother seems energized by the social contact, moving more briskly through her afternoon tasks. "Good to have news," she comments as you help her prepare supper. "Gets lonely out here with just ourselves for company." The isolation of frontier life was perhaps its most psychologically challenging aspect. Homesteads were often miles apart, with natural barriers of weather and terrain frequently making even these short distances impassable. Weeks or months might pass without seeing anyone outside the immediate family, creating a social deprivation that modern people would find almost unbearable. "What's a social like?" you ask, curious about the event mentioned by the Johnsons. Your mother smiles slightly at the memory. A proper one has music and dancing, food laid out for all to share, young folks courting under their parents' watchful eyes, children playing games, men talking crops and politics, women catching up on family matters. Her description reveals the multi-layered functions of frontier social gatherings, simultaneously serving as entertainment, matrimonial market, political forum, news exchange, culinary exhibition, and community bonding exercise. "Everyone dresses in their Sunday best," she continues, stirring the pot of beans that will form your evening meal. "Not that it's much, mind you, but clean and mended at least. And for one evening we pretend we're somewhere fine instead of scratching out life from stubborn soil." This temporary escape from harsh reality, this brief opportunity to experience joy and connection, was perhaps the most valuable aspect of frontier social life. The dance or gathering created a space where laughter was permitted, where physical touch, even if just a formal dance hold, connected isolated individuals, and where music offered emotional expression beyond the pragmatic communication of daily life. The next morning brings another visitor, unexpected and less welcome. A man on horseback arrives shortly after dawn, his city clothes and official manner immediately setting him apart from the neighbours. He carries a leather satchel and wears a badge identifying him as a representative of the county government. "Tax assessor," your mother mutters, watching from the doorway as he dismounts. "What more do they want?" The interaction that follows reveals another dimension of frontier social systems, the sometimes adversarial relationship between settlers and government authorities. The tax assessor has come to verify the property improvements claimed on your family's homestead, ensuring they meet the requirements for continued ownership under the Homestead Act. His inspection is thorough and uncomfortable, measuring the cultivated acreage, examining the structures, and making notes in an official ledger. Your mother follows him silently, her expression carefully neutral despite the intrusion. You tag along, learning yet another frontier lesson, that even in this supposedly Wild West, bureaucracy and government oversight were very real forces. Cultivation looks a bit short of the required percentage, the assessor comments, making another note, and the dwelling is, he glances at the soddy with barely concealed disdain, somewhat primitive. "My husband's working at the mines to earn money for improvements," your mother replies, her voice steady despite the implied criticism. "We meet all legal requirements." The assessor makes a non-committal sound and continues his examination. This tense dance between settlers and officials was common on the frontier, where families often operated at the very edge of legal compliance due to the harsh realities of establishing a homestead with limited resources. After the assessor finally leaves, with a warning about needing to see significant improvements by his next visit, your mother allows herself a rare moment of visible anger. "Sitting in his fine office in town, never broke ground himself, telling us our place isn't good enough," she fumes, aggressively kneading dough for the day's bread. "Let him try living in a soddy through winter, then talk to me about improvements." This resentment toward distant authority figures was a defining characteristic of frontier social attitudes. Settlers who faced daily physical hardship and constant survival pressure had little patience for bureaucratic demands that seemed disconnected from their lived reality. The afternoon brings a more pleasant social interaction when a wagon appears on the horizon, the peddler returning on his regular route. Unlike the tax assessor, the peddler is welcomed warmly, not just for his goods, but for the news and social connection he brings from the wider world. "Heard about your man heading to the mines," he comments as he sets up his mobile display in the yard. "Hard work, but good money if he's lucky." The peddler's wagon contains the usual assortment of necessities and small luxuries: fabric, thread, tools, medicines, spices, and candies. But it's his information that proves most valuable. He's recently come from the direction of the mines and carries news of conditions there. "Company's hiring strong, paying cash as promised," he reports as your mother examines a bolt of fabric. But living conditions are rough. Men packed 12 to a cabin, paying dear for poor food. This intelligence about your father's likely situation is worth more than any goods the peddler carries. The information allows your mother to better estimate when to expect communication or return, and what funds might eventually reach the homestead. The social function of the peddler extended far beyond commerce. In a world without telecommunications, these traveling merchants created connections between isolated communities, carrying news, personal messages, and cultural trends across vast distances. "Any mail for the Masons?" your mother asks hopefully. Though it's too soon for word from your father, the question reveals another aspect of frontier isolation: the hunger for communication from absent loved ones. "Nothing yet," the peddler replies sympathetically, "but I'll check at the post office next time through town. Should be back this way in 3 weeks or so." After some deliberation and careful counting of the few coins set aside for emergencies, your mother purchases needles, a small quantity of sugar, and, somewhat surprisingly, a newspaper printed in the territorial capital. Though several weeks old, the paper represents a rare connection to the wider world and its politics. That evening, by lamplight, your mother reads selected articles aloud, news of congressional debates, railroad expansions, Indian treaties, and territorial disputes. The information might seem abstract given your immediate survival concerns, but frontier settlers understood that distant political decisions could directly impact their lives through land policies, military deployments, or economic regulations. Says here they're considering closing the land office in Jefferson County, she notes with concern, would mean a 100-mile journey to file paperwork instead of 40. This practical interest in seemingly distant affairs reveals the sophisticated political awareness many frontier people maintained despite their isolation. Their vulnerability to policy changes made them avid consumers of political news when available, with strong opinions on issues affecting their precarious existence. The next day brings yet another dimension of frontier social life when a group of Native Americans appears at the edge of your property. Your mother spots them first as she hangs laundry to dry. Pawnee, she identifies them, her voice low but not particularly alarmed. "Probably looking to trade." The small group, 3 men and 2 women, approaches cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance from the soddy. One man steps forward, holding up an item that appears to be a tanned animal hide. "Get the cornmeal," your mother instructs you, "and some of those metal buttons from the sewing box." The interaction that follows defies the simplistic cowboys versus Indians narrative of Hollywood westerns. The trade is conducted with minimal verbal communication but mutual respect, each side examining the offered goods carefully before agreeing to exchange. The buckskin the Pawnee offer is soft and beautifully tanned, far superior to anything your family could produce. In return, your mother provides cornmeal, buttons, and a small knife she retrieves from a hidden location after careful consideration. There's wariness on both sides, but also practiced courtesy. Neither party attempts to cheat the other, understanding that fair trading relationships were valuable in the isolated frontier environment where both settlers and indigenous people faced common challenges of survival. After the trade concludes, the leader of the Pawnee group gestures toward the creek that runs through your property, making a drinking motion and then a negative gesture. He's warning us about the water, your mother interprets, nodding her understanding to the man. Guess that confirms what we suspected about contamination upstream. This exchange of potentially life-saving information exemplifies the complex relationship between settlers and Native Americans on the frontier. While conflicts certainly occurred, pragmatic cooperation was also common, with both groups recognizing the practical value of peaceful coexistence and knowledge sharing. After the Pawnee depart, your mother carefully wraps the buckskin and stores it inside the soddy. "Good trade," she comments. "This will make fine moccasins for winter, much warmer than those store boots that never fit right." The acquisition represents more than just practical value. It's a form of frontier wealth accumulation, storing resources against future needs. In a world without banks or reliable currency, physical goods with utility served as both savings and insurance. As evening approaches, another social dimension of frontier life emerges when your mother suggests a visit to check on Martha, the healer who helped at the barn raising. "Been thinking about that coughing girl," she explains as you saddle the family's remaining horse. And Martha might have letters or news from town. The journey to Martha's homestead takes nearly an hour, following faint trails across the prairie. The homestead itself is modest but better established than yours, with a small wooden house instead of a well-tended garden, and several outbuildings, including what appears to be a dedicated medical space. Martha welcomes you with the automatic hospitality of frontier culture, immediately offering food and asking after your father. The social call quickly reveals its multiple purposes: checking on a neighbor, seeking medical advice, exchanging news, and strengthening community bonds. As the women talk, you observe Martha's home and are struck by the evidence of her unique social position. Unlike most frontier women who were primarily defined by their roles as wives and mothers, Martha appears to be unmarried but respected for her specialized knowledge. Her cabin contains books, a rarity on the frontier, and shelves of labeled containers holding herbs, powders, and medical preparations. "How's the Miller girl?" your mother asks after preliminary pleasantries. Martha's expression grows somber. "Failing, I'm afraid. Consumption's deep in her lungs now. Families talking about sending her to Colorado. The mountain air sometimes helps." This potential journey for treatment represents another aspect of frontier healthcare, the desperate measures families would take when local options were exhausted. The cost of sending a sick family member hundreds of miles to a different climate was enormous, both financially and emotionally. Yet, the alternative was watching them slowly die without intervention. As darkness approaches, your mother prepares to leave, having accomplished her multiple social aims, confirming Martha's assessment of the Miller girl's condition, sharing information about the Pawnee traders and their warning about the creek water, and subtly ensuring that Martha knows your household might need extra attention during your father's absence. The ride home through deepening twilight becomes its own lesson in frontier social awareness. Your mother points out distant lights, other homesteads scattered across the prairie, each representing a family engaged in the same struggle for survival. "Johnson Place there." She indicates a faint glow to the northwest, and that's the Petersons beyond. Can just make out the Williamsons' place on that far rise. This mental mapping of neighbours, knowing exactly who lived where, even miles distant, was crucial to frontier social functioning. In emergencies, knowing which direction to send for help could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Back at your soddy, preparing for sleep after the long day, your mother reflects on the various social interactions you've experienced. "Community keeps you alive out here," she observes, banking the cookstove fire for the night. "Can't make it alone, no matter what those dime novels back east might say about lone heroes of the frontier." This fundamental truth that survival depended on complex social networks rather than individual prowess contradicts the mythic individualism often associated with the Wild West. The reality was a sophisticated system of mutual support, information exchange, and shared resources that helped settlers weather crises no single family could overcome alone. The next day brings another dimension of frontier social life with the arrival of a young boy on a winded horse. He can't be more than 12, but he's clearly ridden hard with an important message. Ma says, "Come quick," he pants, hardly dismounting before delivering his news. "Baby's coming early, and she's having a hard time." Your mother moves with practiced efficiency, gathering clean cloths, her small collection of medical supplies, and a jar of something preserved. Within minutes, she's saddled the horse and is prepared to leave. "It's the Thompsons' fourth," she explains as she mounts. "Previous births were difficult. Martha's already there but asked for extra hands." She fixes you with a serious look. "Mind the place. I might be gone overnight if there's trouble." This emergency midwifery assistance, women dropping everything to help neighbours through childbirth, was another crucial element of frontier social systems. Without hospitals or professional medical care, childbirth was managed by the community's women who shared the dangerous but essential work of bringing new life into the world. Left alone at the homestead, you experience for the first time the profound isolation that was the daily reality for many frontier residents. The soddy feels eerily quiet without your mother's presence, and each creak or rustle from outside raises momentary alarm. This was the psychological burden of frontier life. The constant awareness of vulnerability and the knowledge that help might be hours or days away in an emergency. You move through the necessary chores with extra care, knowing that an injury while alone could be disastrous. Feeding animals, checking traps, hauling water from the rain barrel, the creek still being suspect. Each task takes on new significance when you're the only person responsible for survival. As dusk approaches with no sign of your mother's return, you secure the soddy as she taught you, barring the door, keeping the rifle loaded but safe, banking the fire to last through the night. The simple wooden structure suddenly seems terribly fragile against the vastness of the prairie night and whatever threats it might contain. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds and the heavy awareness of being truly alone in this harsh environment. This, too, was part of frontier experience, the psychological resilience required to endure isolation and uncertainty without modern distractions or communications. Morning brings relief with your mother's return, her exhausted face telling its own story before she speaks. "Baby girl," she reports, dismounting stiffly from the horse. "Breech birth, touch and go for a while, but both mother and child pulled through." The matter-of-fact delivery belies the drama of what must have been a dangerous medical emergency. Breech births frequently resulted in the death of mother, child, or both in an era before surgical interventions or fetal monitoring. Martha turned the baby, your mother continues, accepting the cup of coffee you've prepared. Never seen hands so skilled, like she could feel exactly what needed doing without seeing. This admiration for specialized skill, this recognition of knowledge that meant the difference between life and death, was another aspect of frontier social dynamics. Status came not just from wealth or property, but from useful abilities that contributed to community survival. After resting briefly, your mother returns to normal chores, the childbirth emergency already categorized as just another aspect of frontier social obligation. This matter-of-fact approach to critical events, this lack of dramatization or extended processing, characterized the frontier mentality of handling what came and moving forward. Days pass in the established rhythm of work and occasional social contact. A neighbouring farmer stops by to offer excess seed potatoes. The peddler passes through again, this time carrying a letter from your father, brief but reassuring, reporting his safe arrival at the mines and promising to send money when possible. Martha visits to share medicinal plants she's gathered, taking time to teach you both their preparation and use. Each interaction reinforces the complex social web that made frontier survival possible. No homestead was truly self-sufficient. All depended on the exchange of goods, labor, knowledge, and support that defined frontier community despite the physical distances separating households. 2 weeks after your father's departure, the promised social gathering at the Miller farm finally arrives. Your mother approaches the event with unusual attention to appearance, brushing her hair with special care and putting on a clean dress kept specifically for such occasions. "Not much for finery," she acknowledges, noticing your observation of these preparations. "But a social's one time to remember we're more than just work animals." The miller's completed barn has been transformed for the event, with lanterns hanging from rafters, hay bales arranged as seating, and a cleared area for dancing. A table holds contributions from attending families, pies, cakes, preserves, and roasted meats, representing the best each household could offer. The gathering includes nearly every family within a 20-mile radius, creating a crowd that would seem modest by modern standards but represents an extraordinary concentration of humanity in the sparsely populated frontier. Children run and play in groups, teenagers eye each other with shy interest from opposite sides of the barn, and adults catch up on months of news and developments. You notice how social patterns shift in this rare gathering. Men who work in isolation most days form animated discussion groups, sharing farming techniques, weather predictions, and political opinions. Women who normally manage households alone move between social circles, exchanging recipes, medical advice, and family updates. Young people engage in carefully supervised courtship rituals that will potentially form the next generation of frontier families. The music begins, fiddle, guitar, and someone playing spoons, creating a surprisingly rich sound that fills the barn. Couples form for dancing, following patterns that seem universally known despite the diverse origins of the settlers. Your mother is asked to dance by a widowed neighbour, and she accepts with a smile that momentarily transforms her usually serious face. This celebration, this temporary escape from the grinding work of survival, reveals the human need for joy and connection that persisted even in the harshest frontier conditions. The social wasn't a frivolous luxury, but a necessary psychological release that helped people continue facing the challenges of settlement. Food is shared, stories are told, children fall asleep on hay bales as the evening progresses, and for a few hours the isolation and hardship of frontier life recedes into the background. This too was the real Wild West, not just the struggle and danger emphasized in popular narratives, but the community bonds and simple pleasures that made the struggle worthwhile. As you observe from the sidelines, still feeling somewhat outside this tight-knit community despite your integration into your frontier family, you notice how information flows through the gathering. News of births, deaths, migrations, crop conditions, and distant events passes from person to person, creating a collective awareness that would shape decisions and actions in the coming months. The social also serves practical purposes beyond entertainment. A young man announces he's heading to the territorial capital and offers to carry letters or conduct business for neighbours. Families arrange future work exchanges, helping with harvests or barn repairs in rotation to maximise limited labour. A collection is taken for a family who lost their cow to illness, demonstrating the frontier version of disaster assistance. As the evening winds down and families begin the journey home through darkness, there's a tangible reluctance to disperse, to return to the isolation that defines normal frontier existence. Goodbyes are extended, final news exchanged, and promises made to visit when possible, though all know that work demands and weather conditions will limit such opportunities. The ride home is quiet, both you and your mother lost in your own thoughts as the horse navigates familiar trails by moonlight. The contrast between the lively social gathering and the silent, empty prairie creates a poignancy that needs no verbal acknowledgement. "Good to see folks," your mother finally says as the soddy comes into view. "Reminds you why we keep struggling with this hard land." This simple statement captures the essence of frontier social systems, the community connections that provided not just practical support but psychological motivation to continue despite hardship. People endured the isolation, danger, and backbreaking labour not just for individual survival, but for the chance to build something meaningful together, to create community in the wilderness. Back in the soddy, preparing for sleep after the unusual excitement of the evening, you realize how much your understanding of the Wild West has evolved. The romanticized image of lone heroes and individual triumph has given way to a more complex reality of interdependent communities working together against common challenges. The true story of the frontier wasn't primarily about gunfights and gold rushes, but about ordinary people creating social structures that made survival possible in extraordinary circumstances. Their heroism wasn't in dramatic confrontations, but in the daily choice to persist, to help neighbors, to maintain civilization in conditions that constantly threatened to overwhelm it. As you drift towards sleep, the music from the social still echoing in your mind, you recognize that this too is part of the authentic Wild West experience, the moments of joy and connection that sustained people through the darker times, the community bonds that were as essential to survival as water and food. Outside, coyotes call in the distance, a reminder that wilderness still surrounds this fragile pocket of human settlement. Inside, the soddy feels a bit less primitive after experiencing the shared humanity of the social gathering. Both realities defined the frontier experience. The constant struggle against nature's challenges and the community connections that made that struggle endurable. Sleep comes easily after the unusual activities of the day, your body relaxing into the now familiar straw mattress that no longer seems quite so alien. The frontier social world, with all its complexity, necessity, and occasional moments of joy, has revealed itself as perhaps the most sophisticated adaptation settlers developed in their quest to tame the Wild West. 3 weeks have passed since your father departed for the mines. The rhythm of frontier life has become almost familiar, the daily chores no longer mysterious, the endless work no longer shocking, the primitive conditions no longer quite so jarring. You've adapted to this harsh reality with surprising speed, your body growing stronger and your skills more assured with each passing day. But frontier life has one more lesson to teach, perhaps the most important one. No matter how well you plan, how hard you work, or how carefully you prepare, danger remains a constant companion on the frontier, and sometimes it arrives without warning. The day begins like any other. Early rising, animal feeding, water hauling. The weather is clear and mild, a perfect late spring day with birds singing and wildflowers dotting the prairie. Your mother hums softly as she works in the garden, the sound carrying through the still morning air. Then she stops suddenly, head tilted, listening intently. "Do you hear that?" she asks, her body tensing. At first, you hear nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of the prairie morning. Then it reaches you, a distant rumbling like far-off thunder, but continuous and growing louder. Your mother's face pales. "Fire," she says, the single word carrying unmistakable dread. She points to the horizon where a smudge of darkness has appeared against the blue sky. At this distance it might seem insignificant, but her reaction tells you it's anything but. "Prairie fire," she explains, already moving with urgent purpose toward the soddy. "Wind's bringing it this way. We don't have much time." Prairie fires were among the most feared dangers on the frontier, fast-moving, all-consuming, and nearly impossible to fight once fully established. The sea of grass that stretched for miles in all directions became deadly fuel when ignited, creating infernos that could travel faster than a horse could run. Your mother bursts into action with practiced efficiency, grabbing a shovel and heading to the edge of your ploughed field. "Start digging. We need to widen the fire break." The next hour is a blur of desperate labour. You dig frantically, expanding the bare earth barrier between your cultivated land and the surrounding prairie. Your mother works just as hard, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, her hands blistering on the shovel handle. The smoke grows thicker, the rumbling louder. Occasionally you glance up to see the dark cloud expanding across the horizon, advancing with terrifying speed. The smell reaches you now, burning grass and earth carried on a wind that's beginning to gust ominously. Get the animals, your mother orders as you finish widening the firebreak as much as possible in the limited time. Cow in the soddy, horse ready to ride if we need to flee. Chickens, she hesitates, making hard calculations about what can realistically be saved. Chickens will have to take their chances in the coop. This triage, this brutal assessment of what can be saved and what must be sacrificed, was a common feature of frontier emergencies. With limited resources and time, difficult choices had to be made instantly, with potential survival hanging in the balance. You lead the cow into the soddy, the animal sensing danger and resisting initially before allowing itself to be guided inside. The horse is saddled and tied near the door, ready for quick departure if the firebreak fails to hold. Your mother, meanwhile, has been soaking blankets and burlap sacks in precious water from the rain barrel. For beating out sparks, she explains, handing you a dripping cloth. Stay vigilant. One ember can set everything ablaze. The fire is visible now. A line of flames at the distant edge of the prairie, advancing like an army toward your vulnerable homestead. The roar has grown to a constant thunder, punctuated by crackles and pops as the fire devours everything in its path. Animals flee before it. Rabbits, ground squirrels, even a few deer racing past your property without sparing a glance for the humans they normally avoid. Birds circle overhead, displaced from nests and perches by the advancing inferno. If it jumps the firebreak, your mother shouts over the increasing roar, we take the horse and head for the creek. It's our only chance. The unspoken reality hangs between you. That would mean abandoning everything else to the flames. The soddy might survive with its earthen construction, but all other structures, crops and animals would be lost. Months or years of work destroyed in minutes. As the fire draws closer, you can feel its heat on your face despite the distance still separating you. The sky has darkened with smoke, creating an eerie twilight in what should be mid-morning. Ash begins to fall like grey snow, coating everything with a powdery film. Here it comes, your mother says grimly, gripping her wet sack tighter. Stay ready. The fire hits the edge of your firebreak with frightening intensity, flames leaping higher than you imagined possible. The heat becomes nearly unbearable, forcing you to step back despite the need to remain vigilant for crossing sparks. For endless minutes you watch as the fire burns along the boundary of your land, seeking any opportunity to cross. Occasionally a burning ember flies across on the wind, and you or your mother rush to beat it out before it can ignite the dry grass on your side of the break. It's exhausting, terrifying work, constant vigilance while enduring intense heat, smoke that burns your lungs, and the ever-present knowledge that one missed ember could mean disaster. This was frontier danger in its purest form, elemental, unpredictable, and utterly indifferent to human survival. Eventually, mercifully, the main fire front passes, continuing its destructive path to the east of your property. The immediate danger recedes, though you both continue to watch for hours as smaller fires burn themselves out and new embers occasionally drift onto your land. By late afternoon, the world around you is transformed. Where lush prairie grass once stretched to the horizon, there is now only blackened earth, still smoking in places, the occasional charred remnant of a small animal caught in the flames. The air remains thick with smoke and ash, making breathing difficult and coating your skin with gritty residue. We were lucky, your mother says simply, surveying the devastation. Fire could have changed direction, firebreak could have failed, wind could have carried more embers. This matter-of-fact acknowledgement of how close disaster came, this lack of emotional drama, despite the life-threatening emergency, typified frontier responses to danger. There was no time for extended processing of fear or relief. Survival required immediate focus on what needed doing next. Need to check the creek, she continues practically. Fire might have driven predators our way, and the garden will need extra water after all that heat and smoke. Life continues with barely a pause to acknowledge the narrow escape. This, too, was the frontier way, absorbing potentially traumatic experiences and pushing forward because stopping wasn't an option. The work of survival remained, regardless of what dangers had just been faced. The next morning brings a new threat, different but equally dangerous. You wake to find your mother already up, staring out the small window with obvious concern. "Riders," she says tersely when she notices you're awake. "Don't recognize them." In the frontier environment, unknown visitors represented potential danger. Without law enforcement readily available, homesteaders were largely responsible for their own protection, making caution around strangers a survival necessity rather than paranoia. "Get the rifle ready," she instructs, her voice calm despite the tension evident in her posture, "but keep it out of sight unless needed." The weapon is brought out from its hiding place and loaded efficiently. Your mother positions herself in the doorway of the soddy, greeting the approaching riders with a raised hand but maintaining her place at the threshold, neither overtly hostile nor naively welcoming. "Mornin'," calls the lead rider, a hard-faced man with a dust-covered coat. "Saw you survived the fire." "God's mercy," your mother responds neutrally. "What brings you our way?" "Looking for strays," the man explains, gesturing to the open range. "Fire scattered our herd. Thought some might have come this direction." The explanation is plausible. Cattle would indeed flee from a prairie fire, potentially becoming lost in the process. But something in the man's manner keeps your mother cautious, her hand never straying far from where the rifle rests just inside the door. "Haven't seen any," she responds, "but you're welcome to check our north pasture if you think they might be there." This measured hospitality, offering limited access while maintaining clear boundaries, was another frontier skill in a world where refusing aid to legitimate travelers could violate important social codes, but where vulnerability could be exploited by those with ill intent. Such careful navigation was essential. The riders confer briefly, then decline the offer. "We'll keep looking elsewhere," the leader decides, his eyes scanning your modest homestead with an intensity that seems unnecessary for someone merely seeking lost cattle. As they ride away, your mother remains in the doorway until they're well beyond your property line. Only then does she relax slightly, though the rifle stays within reach. "Weren't looking for cattle," she says with certainty, more likely checking which places were left vulnerable after the fire. This frontier danger, the human predators who saw disaster as opportunity, was less dramatic than the natural threats, but often more malevolent. Without established law enforcement, isolated homesteads could become targets for those seeking to profit from others' misfortune. What would we have done if they'd tried something, you ask, the reality of your vulnerability suddenly stark. Your mother glances at the rifle. "Whatever was necessary," she answers simply. "Out here, sometimes it's just you standing between your family and those who'd take what's yours." This readiness to defend what was essential for survival, this acceptance that conflict might sometimes be unavoidable, was another aspect of frontier reality that contradicts romanticized notions of either lawless violence or peaceful settlement. Most homesteaders sought to avoid trouble but were prepared to face it when necessary. The day continues with heightened vigilance, both of you keeping watch while completing the necessary chores. By evening, no further strangers have appeared, and the tension gradually eases, though the rifle remains more accessible than before. "Your pa should have been gone a month tomorrow," your mother comments as you share a simple supper of beans and cornbread. "If all's gone well, might get word from him soon." The uncertainty surrounding your father's fate, the complete lack of information about his safety or progress, was yet another burden of frontier life. Without regular communication, families lived with constant uncertainty about absent members, never knowing if silence meant merely distance or something more tragic. That night, a new danger arrives, one that demonstrates the frontier's capacity to threaten from unexpected directions. You wake to the sound of your mother coughing violently, her breathing laboured and raspy in the darkness. Just the smoke she manages between coughs. "Got into my lungs yesterday." By morning, her condition has worsened. Fever now accompanies the cough, and her normally strong, capable body seems diminished, huddled under a blanket despite the mild temperature. This too was a frontier reality, how quickly illness could transform strength to weakness. How vulnerable even the most resilient became when health failed. "Need to get Martha," she instructs, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take the horse. Bring her back if she can come." The responsibility falls entirely to you, riding alone across partially burned prairie to seek help, leaving your mother vulnerable in the soddy, navigating without guidance to Martha's homestead. This sudden role reversal, from dependent to provider, was another common frontier experience where circumstances often forced people into responsibilities beyond their preparation or preference. The ride to Martha's seems longer than before, each landmark less certain without your mother's guidance. When you finally arrive, the frontier healer takes one look at your worried face and begins gathering supplies without needing explanation. "Your ma's sick," she confirms, packing herbs and tinctures into a bag. You explain the symptoms, the coughing, the fever, the weakness, and Martha nods grimly. "Smoke sickness," she diagnoses. "Seen it before after big fires, can turn to pneumonia if not treated." The return journey feels both urgent and painfully slow, your anxiety growing with each passing minute. This too was the frontier experience, the terrible knowledge that time could mean the difference between recovery and disaster, coupled with the inability to move faster than animal power allowed. Martha takes charge immediately upon arrival, her experienced hands examining your mother with gentle efficiency. Various treatments are applied, herbal teas, chest poultices, steam inhalations, using techniques refined through generations of frontier medicine. "She needs watching," Martha tells you after the initial treatments. "Day and night for a while. I'll stay today, but you'll need to manage after that." This transfer of medical knowledge, this crash course in necessary care, was another aspect of frontier healthcare. With professional help limited or absent, ordinary people became caregivers by necessity, learning essential skills through direct instruction during crisis. For the next several days, your role transforms entirely. Now you are provider, protector, and nurse, handling all homestead chores while also caring for your mother through feverish nights and painful coughing spells. The experience ages you somehow, responsibility weighing heavier than physical labor ever could. Slowly, incrementally, your mother begins to improve. The fever breaks, the coughing grows less severe, strength gradually returns. But the illness has taken a toll, leaving her thinner and more fragile than before, temporarily unable to manage the physical demands of frontier life. "You've done well," she tells you one evening, watching as you complete chores that would have been hers just days ago. "Couldn't have managed without you." This acknowledgement, this recognition of your essential contribution to survival, carries a significance beyond simple gratitude. It represents your integration into the frontier system, your transformation from observer to participant in the complex dance of mutual dependence that defined settlement life. As your mother continues to recover, another potential danger appears on the horizon, quite literally. Dark clouds build in the west, towering and ominous against the setting sun. The air grows strangely still, with an oppressive quality that makes breathing feel laboured. Storm coming. Your mother observes from where she sits near the door, still too weak for full activity but alert to environmental threats. Bad one, from the look of those clouds. Weather represented one of the frontier's most unpredictable dangers, capable of destroying crops, damaging structures, injuring or killing people and livestock, all without warning or recourse. Without modern forecasting, settlers relied on observation and experience to anticipate threats, but often had little time to prepare. Get everything secured, she instructs. Animals in the barn, water buckets filled, anything that can blow away tied down or brought inside. You work quickly as darkness falls, the approaching storm adding urgency to your movements. The air has taken on a greenish tinge that your mother watches with visible concern from the doorway. Could be a twister in those clouds, she warns. If you hear a sound like a train or see a funnel, get to the root cellar immediately. Don't wait for me. I'll make my own way if needed. This calculation, this prioritization of your safety over hers, reveals another aspect of frontier values. Survival of the young, those who could carry on if others fell, often took precedence over individual safety in emergency planning. The storm hits with surprising suddenness. One moment relative calm, the next a fury of wind and rain lashing the soddy with incredible force. The structure shudders under the assault, dirt crumbling from the walls and roof with each powerful gust. Lightning illuminates the interior in brief, blinding flashes, followed by thunder so powerful it seems to shake the very ground. Rain finds every weakness in the sod roof, creating streams that quickly turn portions of the dirt floor to mud. Get the bedding up, your mother directs, pointing to where water is beginning to pool near the sleeping areas, and put the pan there to catch that worst leak. The night becomes an exercise in constant adaptation, moving containers to catch new leaks, wiping away mud that threatens to infiltrate food stores, reinforcing the door when wind threatens to tear it from its hinges. This dynamic response to crisis, this continuous adjustment to changing threats, characterized frontier resilience at its most fundamental level. Hours pass with no diminishment in the storm's intensity. The soddy, so solid-seeming in fair weather, reveals its vulnerability to nature's fury. Yet it stands, its earthen mass absorbing punishment that would have destroyed flimsier structures. This is why we build with sod first, your mother explains during a brief lull in the thunderclaps. Wood house would look prettier, but might not survive a night like this. The practical wisdom of frontier construction, prioritizing function over appearance, survival over comfort, demonstrates again how every aspect of settler life was shaped by environmental realities rather than aesthetic preferences. Eventually, mercifully, the storm begins to weaken. The wind dies down from howling fury to occasional gusts, the rain from horizontal sheets to gentle drops. By dawn, it has passed entirely, leaving a transformed landscape in its wake. The damage assessment begins at first light. The soddy has survived largely intact, though with new leaks to repair and a partial collapse of one wall section that will require immediate attention. The chicken coop has lost its roof entirely, though miraculously most of the birds remain, huddled in corners or under what shelter remains. The garden has been flattened, tender plants beaten into the mud by rain and hail. The crops in the field show similar damage, though your mother offers hope that some might recover if weather improves in the coming weeks. Could have been worse, is her measured assessment as you complete the survey. No tornado, barn still standing, animals alive. This capacity to find silver linings in disaster, to measure loss against what remains rather than what might have been in better circumstances, was another psychological adaptation to frontier hardship. Focusing on continued survival rather than setbacks allowed settlers to maintain the determination necessary for recovery. The next days are consumed with repair work, fixing damaged structures, salvaging what crops can be saved, restoring order to the homestead after nature's disruption. Your mother, though still weakened from her illness, insists on contributing what she can, her knowledge guiding your stronger labour. Getting to be quite the homesteader, she comments as you successfully repair the chicken coop roof without guidance. Hardly recognise the city boy who couldn't collect eggs without getting pecked. The observation, delivered with the closest thing to humour you've heard from her, acknowledges your transformation over these weeks on the frontier, the skills you've developed, the resilience you've demonstrated, the adaptation to conditions that once seemed impossibly primitive, all mark your integration into this harsh but functional world. A week after the storm, as life has begun returning to its normal rhythm, a distant figure appears on the eastern horizon, a single rider approaching slowly along the faint trail that connects to the main road. Your mother watches the approach with cautious hope, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Might be news, she says, not specifying what news she most hopes for. Word from your father, information about the mines, or simply updates from the wider world you've been disconnected from during these crisis-filled weeks. As the rider draws closer, her posture changes, tension visibly leaving her body. It's Thomas, she identifies your neighbour, the gaunt man who traded butter for eggs weeks earlier. Looks like he's coming from town. Thomas brings multiple forms of news, letters that arrived at the general store for local families, updates on market prices for crops and livestock, reports of events in the territorial capital, and most significantly for your household, information about the mining operation where your father works. Company's still hiring, he reports as he accepts the coffee your mother offers. Paying as promised too, which isn't always the case. No major accidents reported last couple weeks. This indirect reassurance, this absence of bad news rather than confirmation of good, was often the best information frontier families could hope for regarding absent members. Without direct communication, no news became good news by default, allowing for cautious optimism rather than constant worry. Thomas also brings word of other dangers that have emerged in recent weeks. A band of horse thieves operating near the territorial border, a dispute between cattle ranchers and farmers turning violent 30 miles north, an outbreak of measles in the nearest town. Each threat represents another facet of frontier danger: human malice, conflict over resources, disease in population centres. None directly impacts your homestead at present, but all serve as reminders of the varied ways security could be undermined in this precarious environment. Before departing, Thomas delivers one final piece of news that brings genuine relief. Railroad companies sending engineers to check the water quality along the creek. Seems there were complaints about mine tailings contamination all through the valley. This rare instance of outside intervention, of authority addressing a common threat that individual settlers couldn't manage alone, represents the gradual transition from pure frontier self-reliance to more organized governance that characterized the West's development over time. As Thomas rides away, your mother seems momentarily lighter, buoyed by the indirect news of your father's likely safety and the potential resolution of the water contamination issue. But frontier life allows little time for extended reflection or celebration, quickly returning you both to the necessary work of survival. Garden needs replanting, she notes, already mentally calculating what seeds remain and what might still grow in the advancing season, and that wall won't fix itself. The days that follow settle into a pattern of recovery and rebuilding, repairing storm damage, replanting what was lost, adapting to changed circumstances with the resilience that defined frontier success. Your mother's health continues to improve, though the illness has left a lingering weakness that means more responsibility remains on your shoulders than before. One evening, as you sit outside the soddy watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, your mother joins you in a rare moment of restful contemplation. "Not what you expected, is it?" she asks unexpectedly. "This life out here?" The question startles you, both in its insight into your outsider perspective and in its acknowledgement of the gap between frontier mythology and reality. For weeks you've played the role assigned to you in this strange time travel scenario, but in this moment she seems to recognize your fundamental foreignness to this world. No, you admit honestly, it's harder, but also you search for the right words, more real, somehow. She nods as if this makes perfect sense. Folks back east have funny ideas about what it's like, think it's all adventure and freedom. A rare smile briefly crosses her face. Plenty of both, I suppose, just not the kind they imagine in those novels. This self-awareness, this recognition of the gap between frontier myth and reality by those who actually lived it, offers a final lesson about the Wild West. The people who settled these lands weren't ignorant of how their experiences were being romanticized and distorted. They simply had no time or energy to correct the record when daily survival demanded everything they had. Would you choose it again? You ask, curious about how someone fully immersed in this life viewed its hardships in balance with its rewards. She considers the question seriously, looking out over the homestead that represents years of backbreaking labour, constant danger and precious little material comfort to show for it all. Yes, she finally answers. It's a hard life, might kill us all yet, but it's ours in a way nothing back east ever was. She gestures toward the distant horizon. Every day we survive here, we've done it ourselves. Nobody's master but nature herself, and she's a fair boss, if a stern one. You doesn't care if you're rich or poor, just if you're smart and willing to work. This frontier philosophy, this valuing of independence and self-determination above comfort or security, helps explain why people endured such hardships willingly, even knowingly. The mythology wasn't entirely false, it simply emphasized the ideological rewards while minimizing the physical costs of frontier life. As darkness falls and the first stars appear in the deepening blue sky, you both return to the soddy, the brief moment of philosophical reflection giving way to practical concerns, securing animals for the night, banking the fire, preparing for another day of frontier survival. Later, lying on your now familiar straw mattress, listening to the night sounds that once seemed alien but now form a recognizable symphony, you reflect on all you've learned during this strange journey through time. The Wild West of reality was indeed wild, but not in the ways popular culture portrays it. The true wildness lay in nature's indifference, in the precariousness of survival, in the constant adaptation required by an environment that offered opportunity and danger in equal measure. The real heroes weren't gunslingers or outlaws, but ordinary people who faced extraordinary challenges with stubborn determination. People like your frontier mother, who endured illness, isolation, and constant hardship without surrendering to despair. People like your father, who risked dangerous work far from home to secure his family's future. People like Martha, Thomas, and the Millers, who created community in a landscape that constantly threatened to overwhelm human connection. Their stories, the true stories of the Wild West, contain less drama but more courage than the mythologized versions. They speak to fundamental human resilience, to the capacity for adaptation and endurance that allowed settlement to succeed despite overwhelming odds. As sleep begins to claim you, your body tired from another day of frontier labor but now accustomed to its demands, you find yourself grateful for this glimpse into a reality few modern people truly understand. The romanticized Wild West of movies and novels has its place in culture, but the actual lived experience, with all its harshness, complexity, and unexpected beauty, deserves equal remembrance. Outside, coyotes call to each other across the vastness of the prairie, their voices echoing under a star-filled sky unmarred by light pollution. Inside the humble soddy, two people rest in the temporary safety they've carved from a hostile environment through knowledge, labor, and sheer determination. This is the real Wild West, not a backdrop for gunfights and glory, but a testing ground for human resilience and community. Its true story isn't found in dramatic showdowns, but in the quiet heroism of daily survival against forces that would have overwhelmed any individual facing them alone. As consciousness fades, you carry this understanding with you, a perspective on history that no textbook could provide, an appreciation for the complex reality behind the simplified myths. Whatever happens tomorrow, whether you remain in this frontier world or return to your own time, this knowledge has changed you much as the frontier itself changed those who encountered it. The last sensation before sleep takes you completely is the surprising comfort of your simple straw bed, once so alien and now as familiar as the calluses on your hands or the weather awareness in your bones. Adaptation is perhaps humanity's greatest strength, the ability to find home in the most unlikely places, to create belonging in the face of constant challenge. And with that thought, you drift into dreams of both worlds, the modern comforts left behind and the frontier realities embraced, finding value and limitation in each, understanding at last that the true history of the Wild West lives in this complexity rather than in the simplified stories that would come later. This, finally, is the lesson of waking up in the Wild West, that behind every myth lies a messier, harder, more human truth waiting for those willing to look beyond the comfortable narratives to find the authentic story of how ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges, and, sometimes against all odds, prevailed. And with that, close your eyes and drift off to sleep, carrying with you the true spirit of the frontier, not in gunsmoke and glory, but in the quiet courage of those who built America one difficult day at a time, finding strength in community, purpose in struggle, and occasionally joy in the wild beauty of a world not yet tamed.